Okay. Oh, there it is. Right? Yes, there it is. What do you know? How fun. Good evening. It's February 13th, 2023. The year of our Lord, or whatever Lord you choose to believe in, as long as they were born 2023 years ago. I don't know. I'm trying to improvise here. Good evening. It's a Monday night. Little unconventional, but that's okay. I apologize. I was out sick last week. I had my COVID vaccine on Tuesday, and I was sick for 4 days afterwards. So there's that. But felt better than when I had COVID, so that's a plus. Before we get started for the evening, I do want to say it's on the screen now, but if you're a podcast listener, this link will also be in the description of this podcast. Today's show, all donations and proceeds from Fanatics and everything will be donated to the Canadian Red Cross to alleviate the relief efforts in Turkey and Syria after that devastating earthquake they had not too long ago. So anything you buy using the QR code above my head or the link in the description, the kickback I get, I'll donate it to the Canadian Red Cross. I'll match it as well. I will do the exact same with any YouTube donations through the super chat here, or you can direct donate if you would rather do that and get your own tax receipt and everything. You can donate through the link in the description. So just wanted to get that out of the way. Obviously, my thoughts are with everybody affected by that horrific disaster. Not that I have Turkish or Syrian family, but I grew up in Toronto. There's a massive community of pretty much every community under the sun there. I feel personally intertwined with Toronto and everyone who lives there. So just getting that out of the way, and let's have a good show and do some fun stuff. Okie dokie. Let's just also, I guess for the podcast listeners, I'll go through the list of tracked players this week. Obviously, this will be basically 2 weeks worth of tracked players. There's a lot of them. So bear with me while I get through this list. I started the week and a half ago at this point, I guess. Gavin Brindley was the first one. He stayed the same. Martin Michkov, he stayed the same. Nick Lardis, he stayed the same. Quentin Burns, he was on my list, and he stayed on the watch list. I didn't move him up into the numbers. Daniil Boot moved down a couple of spots. Maxim Sturbak stayed the same. Dmitry Simashev stayed the same. Aidar Suniev stayed the same. Charlie Serrato, I moved him up. I think he's on the last slot on my ranking list now. Lucas St. Louis, I pulled him off my list. Tanner Molendijk, I did a game of. Jesse Nurmi, I did a game of. Andrew Strothman, FunQ, thank you for the donation. I did a game of Jesse Nurmi, he stayed the same. I did a game of Andrew Strothman, he stayed the same. I did a game of Braden Yeager, he moved up a couple of spots. Eric Polkamp, I did a game of, he stayed the same. Magomed Sharakhanov, I pulled him off the list, unfortunately, as much as it hurts my soul. Bradley Nadeau, I moved him down 2 spots. Caden Hamill, he's not on my list, but I watched him because he's a guy that I haven't seen yet. He's still not on the list. Pontus Falk, he moved up a few spots. He's been moving up a little bit. James Hong, I did another game of. He stayed off the list. Svante Shodin, I pulled him off the list reluctantly, but for now. Petter Vesterheim, I put him back on the list. He was on the list prior, but I put him there on the watch list. I did another game of Timur Mukhanov. He stayed the same. I did a game of Zeb Forsfjall. He stayed the same. I did a game of Connor Bedard today, and he stayed the same at number 1. And I did a game of USHL player Harper Bentz. It's been since September since we looked at him here, so I figured it was time to take another look, and he stayed off the list. That's it for this week in terms of guys that I watched, and any viewers, you'll be able to watch it scrolling by on the right side. Anyway, with that out of the way, we can start getting through some questions here. There are already quite a few of them, so that's always great. Thank you very much, as always, and welcome to the show. It's been a busy week. Anyway, first question of the night. It seems, as of right now, literally today, if you were to bet $100 on the over or under of player where you think a player will be drafted right now, over under for Gavin Brindley at 16.5, over under 10.5 for Oliver Moore. So let me get this out of the way. This is not gambling advice, because whenever I give gambling advice, the opposite thing happens. Although last night I bet that the Chiefs were going to win the Super Bowl. I bet $2 and won. But I also bet that I think Travis Kelce, whichever one is on the Kansas City Chiefs, I thought he was going to win MVP. He didn't. So I don't think he did. So in any case, don't take my gambling advice. It's very rare that I win. But I would probably, as of right now, hit the over on Gavin Brindley at 16.5, and I'd probably hit the under on Oliver Moore. I get the feeling someone is going to jump at the chance to add a guy like Oliver Moore. It might be a riskier bet, I think, than Gavin Brindley past 16. I just think that maybe things will change between now and the end of the year, but the market seems pretty pessimistic about Gavin Brindley still, even though he's been on a real heater this year. But if he does go on a heater on boards towards the end of the year, I'll feel pretty good about it. And Oliver Moore, I think someone's going to take a chance on him. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see someone draft him higher than a lot of people think, just because of what he brings to the table. So yeah, I might hit the under on Moore and the over on Brindley. And now that I've said that, it's going to be the opposite. Do you think Tanner Molendyk will end up being a first-round pick? I think it's possible. He wouldn't be the first defenseman a team bets on in the first round that really has good skating ability, good skating mechanics, good mobility in all directions, crisp, hard passer in transition, good shooter as well. He does a lot of things really well with the puck on his stick, and, he uses his mobility well enough defensively to make it work. I think it might be a bit of a reach late first, for an NHL team, but I might think about it. He's a really, really good skater, and you can work with him. Could he run a power play of some kind in the future? I don't see why not. He probably has just as good a chance as any in the late first round pick to be like a middle pair guy, just like the guys in the late first are typically like third line centers, third line wingers. Like they're usually just guys to have around that are day in, day out useful players. And I could see Molendyk filling a role similar to just a day in, day out guy who does certain things really well and has some holes elsewhere. And that's okay. Can you describe Gavin Brindley's style of play and what he projects at? Please give NHL comparables if possible. He seems like a unique player. I don't know about unique. But I do think with Brindley, he has the style of play that I think a lot of coaches are looking for, right? Like, he is just nonstop. Every single shift he's out there, he's just nonstop. He's doing stuff in terms of, especially off the puck. He's just a monster when it comes to hounding guys, forechecking hard, just being a real pain in the behind for guys that, have no. He just comes at you all the time. Really, really, really efficient guy offensively in transition as well. Just a really, really capable puck carrier with skill and speed and quickness, and putting that together with his passing ability is hit and miss, I think. Like, that's kind of like his weakness is obviously like a lot of small players just dealing with pressure and sort of fighting through things, but he is just as good as anyone else, I think, in terms of doing that. He's a really, really talented player, really high pace, high energy guy, attacks the middle of the ice. Maybe doesn't, at 5-on-5 in the data that I've tracked, like he does have a bit of problems consistently sort of driving potential scoring results, and that is reflected in his scoring. At least, I know he's been on a tear recently. I don't think I've done a game in February. I think I did one of the first games he did after returning from the World Junior, and that honestly was the best game I've tracked of him all year. An NHL comparable, like maybe a less pesty version of like a Brendan Gallagher comes to mind. Like a guy that might surprise people with how he can score 60 points in a season and just like drive really, really good results at both ends. I don't think that's too out of the question for Brindley. I think he's got a lot to work with, especially if he just gets more reps to play his brand and be a little bit more of an offensive, like coordinator kind of player. But I would really, really like Gavin Brindley on my team. That's like 100% certain. Even if he isn't the most high-flying, high-scoring guy, you put him with, you tell him to go to the net off puck, and he'll raise hell, and you put him on a line with some physical guys and maybe a puck possession sort of playmaker that can work off of Brindley, and Brindley can just sort of be there as well and be that sort of finisher guy or the guy that forces offensive zone turnovers. You're going to get a good player. I'm a huge fan of Gavin Brindley, and yeah, I mean, I don't know so much about unique, but he fits a role that I personally, you could never have enough of. What overall do you think Michkov actually gets picked at? I know I disagree with having him as low as you do, but I know you track his data closely. Maybe he goes to the Habs with one of their 2 picks. It's a good question. I don't really know. I mean, I've moved Michkov up significantly since he went to Sochi. Registrar, thanks for the donation. I'll get to your question after this question. Australian dollars, what do you know? But thank you. I'll answer about Klimovich in a second. But anyway, yeah. So with Michkov, I've moved him up significantly since he moved to Sochi, and I could talk about that if you want. There's a lot that really looks a lot different now relative to playing with St. Petersburg and the KHL St. Petersburg team before this season, or before he went to Sochi. Like he's settling into a system a lot better, and he's a lot more selfless. And clearly I think he's got like guidance now, and he's not kind of just doing whatever he wants. I think he's he's learning. I think he's very quickly sort of picked up playing in a system and being a part of that unit and being much better in terms of a lot of different areas of the game that were really, I guess, concerning in St. Petersburg. But anyway, I think, I don't imagine he's gonna go much later than I have him ranked. Like, I think he could go as high as 3, and he's in a tier for me that stretches all the way to 3. If you really want a goal-scoring winger that has skill and some potential to round out his game elsewhere, then let me just adjust my green screen here. There we go. If you want that, then yeah, I could see it. I mean, personally, I would go with Leo Carlsson first. But I think there's a discussion to be had with him relative to Zach Benson and him relative to Oliver Moore. But I personally would go with those players first. But Michkov, in terms of his talent, he's not going any. Like, I'm taking Matvei Michkov. At least I would push for Michkov over an Andrew Crystal or a Will Smith. I'd push for that. Now, I did watch Dmitry Simashev play Sochi not too long ago, and Simashev ate Michkov alive, and Dylan Griffin also showed some clips from that game that I had missed that also were just Simashev dealing with Matvei Michkov, which is a very interesting thought process, considering what Simashev does really well. But in terms of talent and potential, if Michkov is there past 6 or 7, because teams are afraid of dealing with Russian players or afraid of dealing with his contract or whatever narrative you want to bring up, then that's a pretty solid pick. And if it's the Habs that takes him, I think it might be a bit of a strange fit in Montreal based on who they've drafted last year with Kent Hughes at the helm and how they approach, drafting really high in the draft, like what they said about Yuri Slafkovsky. It just doesn't pass the smell test to me, but I'm not saying it's impossible. And if it's like 6th or 7th overall, then yeah, you've done well, and you've got a good scoring winger there. I just feel like there's other priorities maybe for the Habs that might need more attention, but it depends on where the chips fall and where you're picking and who gets drafted. Excluding Bedard and Fantilli in this upcoming draft, how do you rank the top 5 highest ceiling and highest floor players? Well, I mean, for ceiling, for me, it depends on what kind of ceiling you're looking for, but like, assuming everything goes extremely well for these players in their development, like Will Smith, Oliver Moore, Leo Carlsson, Dmitry Simashev, and Andrew Crystal, in some order there, probably are all really, really high upside guys. The highest floors, I mean, I might put Dvorsky in there. Like, it's pretty easy to see Dvorsky being some kind of NHL player. I would put David Reinbacher in there. I think it's also pretty easy to see him being a pretty decent NHLer. Ryan Leonard, I feel like, could be a pretty easy bet for some kind of NHL role. Zach Benson is going to be some kind of player. He's going to maybe be a second line high offensive guy. Callum Ritchie might be another one that shows a really safe projectable floor of talent. Those 5 guys might make sense for like good NHL floors that might be worth it. And the question. Yes, I didn't miss the question. Sorry, right? I forgot, and then yes, I appreciate the reminder. I know you probably haven't covered the AHL very much, but what are your thoughts on Danila Klimovich? 21 points in 42 games playing 4th line minutes. Love from Australia. Yeah. Klimovich is interesting. I haven't seen anything of Klimovich lit this year in the AHL, but I mean, I would say that people poo-pooing on Klimovich are probably it's like people who were complaining about like Timothy Liljegren when he was in the AHL at 20. Now, if I'm not mistaken, he is 21, Klimovich. No, Klimovich just turned 20. So that is a very important thing to remember, right? Like you took I don't know. I didn't agree with this strategy. First of all, I wouldn't have probably drafted Klimovich where he was drafted in the first place, but he has traits that certainly could make him an NHL player, right? Like he's got a great shot. He's got some good skill, like pre-shot skill, and he's got projectable scoring ability. But basically the entire rest of the picture for me was a real mixed bag at 5-on-5. But also, yeah, going from the Belarusian 3rd division to the AHL is an enormous jump. It's an enormous jump. Like that, it's not even funny how big a jump that is. And so it's going to take time for him to figure it out. And plus, Abbotsford hasn't been the greatest from what I've seen. Look, I don't know if there's like a massive NHL upside there with Danila Klimovich, and I'm not sure how much of his production comes from the power play and comes from even strength. I might be able to look that up. But at the end of the day, like, he was always going to be a long-term project, and I wouldn't worry about it too much. A half a point a game is pretty productive. Let me just take a look at Vancouver's system here. Let me pull it in here. Klimovich, where are you? Yeah, I mean, like, he's shooting the puck a ton, and you're right, he's not playing a tremendous amount of minutes. And his overall involvement is higher, in all situations as opposed to even strength. So to me, that indicates that he is producing more on the power play, but like, I feel like that's going to be his job. Like in the NHL, he's probably just going to be a bottom 6 guy that you put on your second power play unit as a shooter, and you could get something out of that. And that's fine. And if that's just the role they're trying to get him used to, and then over time he'll just play more and more minutes in the AHL and just get more and more confident there, then great. But again, I think the development process for him has always been longer than it's just been a long curve for him anyway, considering where he was coming from as a player, and where he was drafted and how much clearly Vancouver sees in him based on where they drafted him. And it's going to take some time because he just turned 20 and he's in the AHL for the 2nd season in a row, being a kid coming from low level play in Belarus. Is there a better name in hockey than Gunnar Wolf Fontaine? Probably. Do you have any NHL comparables for Fantilli and Carlson? Also, what have you thought about Bjork and Bernie on the Blue Jackets? I mean, I haven't seen any of Marcus Bjork and Tim Bernie with the Blue Jackets yet, but I've liked both of them through all of the years I've been doing this. Marcus Bjork was a very productive SHL kid when he was 21, I think, for Oskarshamn. And Tim Bernie was a guy that I've always actually really liked. Like, I knew he was a long-term project when he was playing in Switzerland when I watched him when he was a kid. But I really liked the sort of skating and skill level that you saw out of him, and the ability he had to sort of possess the puck at the World Juniors when he was there that I saw. He kind of, the rest of the picture is a bit murky. But I'm happy to see both of those guys in the NHL, even though it is on the Columbus Blue Jackets this year, but I haven't seen any specific tape of those guys in the NHL. But I'm glad they're there, and it's always fun to see that. And NHL comparables for Fantilli and Carlson. Fantilli kind of reminds me a little bit of, I hesitate to say it, but he does kind of remind me a little bit of like young Austin Matthews, right? Maybe not the goal scorer, really. Like, he's not the same level goal scorer, I don't think. But he is this sort of big, dynamic, powerful, big, dynamic, and powerful, really good shooter. Learning to throw his weight around a little bit more. Again, like, it took a few years for, like, Austin Matthews to round out his game beyond goal scoring. And I think Fantilli's sort of like the inverse of that, but the talent profile is similar. And someone mentioned Nathan MacKinnon, and I think McKinnon's also a solid answer. I think he's a bit bigger than McKinnon, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, like, a fast, powerful guy up the middle that can possess the puck really well and shoot the puck really well, that kind of guy. Karlsson is a little more of a traditional hockey guy. Like, he's not as quick or dynamic. He's just more brute force and energy. But he also has some good skill to slip through traffic and deal with pucks in traffic, and has these, like, little bits of skill that really project well. Like, if you can get through pressure like he does, you can unlock a lot of just little scoring chances that matter just as much as the fancy ones, right? Like, I think if you watch tape of Leo Karlsson expecting him to, like, dazzle you every single night, he won't, but he battles and he fights and he's resilient and he's skilled. And like, he has some moments where you go, okay, like, I'd like to see more of this, right? Like, puck manipulation around guys to get inside, to get to the front of the net. And once in a while you see some really impressive stuff. I saw him once go right across the goal mouth and go between the legs and try to roof it, which would have been awesome. But it didn't work. Like, he does little things like that while also being a big, strong boy. Which I think a lot of NHL teams really like. And I'm trying to think of an NHL player that reminds me of. Who would that be? NHL. Maybe like an Anze Kopitar type guy. Maybe like a really sort of solid 200-foot dude who has skill, can make those little plays in traffic, and just put points on the board consistently by just being in the right place at the right time and doing the right things when necessary. Maybe something like that covers it. I'm trying to think of other options while I look at top scorers in the NHL. Yeah, we'll say that and move on. I don't know. I mean, I'm never a huge player comparison guy, but those are the general player types that you're looking at. Hottest trade deadline take. Oh boy. It's a good question. Because you want a hot take, and the hottest hot takes always happen on trade deadline day. Why is Andrew Peak on the trade bait board for TSN? And Vladislav Gavrikov is number 4 on the list. It's hard. I don't know. I mean, I like to think about who's going to be the insane overpayment, and the in vogue answer is Joel Edmondson. But part of me wants to, I don't know. Like, I know Jake McCabe is okay. I mean, I feel like someone's going to pay too much for Luke Shen, but it won't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because, like, he's not a terrible hockey player. Like, is someone going to shell out for Carson Soucy, right? Like, I don't know. Also, this is formatted so weirdly. I don't know how I'm supposed to read this. I don't know. I'm gonna dodge hottest trade deadline question because I know something hotter is just gonna come around. Okay, hi David. Quick question first. Okay, what is a Nick Lardis and why is it scoring so much? Well, I mean, a Nick Lardis is a small animal that, you know, really knows how to fire projectiles from its body. You know, it's one of these things that you don't really notice when you're in the forest. You're kind of sneaking around, and it's sort of on the side of a tree, just sort of spying, and then, you know, next thing you know, it's shooting a puck, it's shooting a projectile at you, shaped like a hockey puck, and you can't see it, you can't catch it, and next thing you know, you're embarrassed in the middle of the forest by this silly tiny little animal. They're very cool. They're very nice. You know, the populations moved from one biome to the next over the last, glacial period. The last sort of trade deadline, if you will. And since then, the new biome has been a lot more appreciative and a much more important fit with a little bit more time to spend in the tree for him to shoot projectiles. But all jokes aside, Nick Lardis, I love Nick Lardis. I mean, I have a game ready to go for this week of him playing with Hamilton. But with Nick Lardis, like, his talent has always been there once he's in the offensive zone. Always. And his thing always has been just shooting the puck really, really well and just finding little pockets of space to hang out in and making little passes to maintain possession. And then they find him in open space and ba-ba-bang, ba-boom, the puck's in the back of the net. Do I think there's an NHL player there? I'm not sure. But if he's there as like a mid to late round pick with a lot of points on the board for Hamilton, and you just see him as a guy that could play on your, I don't think Nick Lardis is going to be a guy who's going to be able to play bottom six NHL roles or minutes but also come out on the power play and play. Like, he's almost maybe projected as more of a power play specialist in the NHL, but he does have some pace in his game. He does have some speed. There is a bit of skill. It just needs to be better at 5-on-5. Like, his results are a little bit mixed, I would say, as I pull them up. His results are a little bit mixed here. This is Nick Lardis, by the way. I've been making an effort to put the names of the guys we're talking about a little bit more up here. So, I mean, yeah, like, Nick Lardis's possession results are okay. His transition results are middling to okay. Very involved defensively, which is surprising, and pretty effective as well. Just very much sort of anticipating play and knocking down pucks and doing what needs to be done. Pretty good stick checker as well. But really his bread and butter is once the puck is in the offensive zone, you get him the puck and he'll put it in the back of the net. And he also is a decent playmaker on his own, but he's much more of a finisher. And I like him. I like Lardis a lot. And I think he's gonna work out just fine. Zach, thank you for the donation. I don't know. People say I do accents okay, but I've never been able to do David Attenborough. I don't know. His brother is the one that goes, "Welcome to Jurassic Park," right? Like, that's him. Anyway, I don't know. The Attenborough brothers never really been my jam. But yeah, Nick Lardis is a good one. I'm a fan of him, and if he's there in sort of the mid to late rounds, yay. And I feel pretty good about putting him on my top 10 list for Brock there. I might have been the only person to put him on the list. I might be wrong on that. Otten OHL top 10. I just need to check before I give myself a pat on the back. A mid-season. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. December 14th. Lardis? Oh, okay. 4 total votes. I think I was the one who had him at 7. I could be wrong. I had him pretty high, I believe. In any case, that being said, let's move on. Read an article showing a correlation between high penalty minutes in a player's draft year and a low total NHL games played. Are penalty minutes something you notice or think is significant? So in an answer, no. I think I know the article you're talking about. And the way that to me, penalty minutes are bad, right? Like, you don't want to play a man down. Like, that's like that. I remember when the analytics thing like started gaining some steam, and a big part of it that really sort of caught on with a lot of people, at least to me, was the idea of like, penalty minutes are bad. Like, why would you willingly be a man down more often? Like, it makes no sense. Like, if you're trying to win the game, and to do so, you need to put yourself a man down to mentally gain an advantage somehow, it doesn't make a difference. right? Like, and the Toronto Maple Leafs were like one of the teams that were the holdouts of like, no. Like, we need to be truculent. We need to be physical. We need a fourth line of guys that will drop the gloves, even with the instigator rule, right? Like, none of these things make sense. So when I think about penalty minutes, I mean, it makes sense to me, right? Like, for a long time, I don't think this is the case anymore. Again, this is anecdotal, but I spend a lot of time studying the NHL draft and its trends. And to me, I see less and less evidence every year of teams chasing the types of players that rack up the penalty minutes, but they do exist out there. I think that when I don't really notice that, like in my big data tracker here, like you'll notice that penalty minutes aren't in here, and maybe they should be, but they're not. And the thing about penalty minutes for me is sometimes I'll notice a player taking some penalties, or when I look at their profile, they have a lot of penalty minutes, and I go, well, okay, I can see why they take a lot of penalties, right? Like David Jiricek is a great example. So when I look at David Jiricek last year, I saw a player that took a lot of penalties because of his flaws. Not necessarily because I didn't look at David Jiricek and go, oh, he's a big meanie boy and I don't want to draft him because he's mean to other hockey players. It's like, no, like a big reason you draft David Jiricek is because he is a punisher. Like he's a big boy and he wants to use it a lot. And that's a good thing in my opinion, especially for a defenseman. But he took a lot of penalties and a lot of them were needless, right? Like it was like, instead of moving his feet, he would try to lift a stick from way too far away and try like 4 times instead of moving his feet and then clip a guy with a high stick, right? Or he'd like lose a physical battle, right? He lost a lot of physical battles along the boards last year, and instead of moving his feet to keep up with those battles, he just would hook a guy or trip him, get his stick tied up in their feet and take an easy penalty, right? Like in front of the net, one too many cross checks a few too many times. I think I remember seeing him like throw a guy into his own goalie and take a 2-minute penalty. And you're like, okay, like I see what you're trying to do. Just tweak it a little, right? Like I love what you're trying. Just smidge, just turn her down a little bit and let's work on the feet so that you can drive a lot more power with your lower body and pin guys against the boards better. David Reinbacher is similar this year to a lesser extent, I would say. But in terms of penalty minutes, like I notice when guys take a lot of penalties and I need to know why, right? Is it because they're just taking a lot of penalties? Like I think those things are fixable because I think traditionally in the NHL draft, teams were looking at guys that took a lot of penalty minutes because they fought a lot or they, like took a lot of boarding penalties, right? And they're like, yeah, that'll work in the NHL. And in reality, there's a lot more to the game than just taking penalties or like putting yourselves a man down, right? And a lot of these guys, I remember again being a kid growing up in Toronto, names like Jamie Devane, being in the AHL. Richard Greenop was one that I remember. And just, it's like they're there to take penalties because that's all they really knew how to do. And I feel like that type of player is less common in the NHL and less common in the draft. Because they should be, because it's one of the easiest arguments you can make with data that it's just a crazy strategy to pursue, right? Like it didn't take very long for people to be like, okay, those analytics nerds might be wrong a lot, but what they're right about is the fact that putting us a man down a bunch of times in a game is not a good thing. So we should probably minimize those things, especially in a league where they're calling more and more penalties, as much as we all complain about how little they call penalties. But I'm just saying, relative to what it was at this point 15, 20 years ago, I remember what hockey was like 15 to 20 years ago, and yeah, like things were different, but they are not different anymore. They're different from what they were, and that what it was also different from today. You know what I mean? Okay, next question. I'm not sure what to make of Dalibor Dvorsky. Am I crazy to worry about an average skater with pace issues without high-end skill? So Dalibor Dvorsky is going to be a very interesting time machine for me in 5 or 10 years. There's a big part of me that doesn't want anything to do with Dalibor Dvorsky in the top 15, 20 of this year's draft, maybe 15. We'll say 15 and give him the benefit of the doubt. I personally see what you mean, right? Like when I watch Dalibor Dvorsky, I see a guy where I go, I can absolutely see why you can't score at 5-on-5. His 5-on-5 data for me is bad. It's just bad. His results, his possession results are okay, and his offensive transition results are actually very good. But defensively, the guy is just not there, really, as in transition especially. And in 5-on-5 in the offensive zone, he's just not really doing a whole lot. He's much more of a perimeter playmaker, shooting pucks himself from distance and just not really penetrating the inside very much at all. And that's problematic, right? Like, especially for a guy touted as a scorer. But, I mean, Dvorsky I do think is a little bit miscast, and I think maybe overcorrected narratively speaking. Like, I think he'll be an NHL player because not every NHL player is a high-pace, high-skill guy, right? Like, I think there should be more high-pace and high-skill players in the NHL, but that doesn't mean that guys that are not that can't work. And with Dvorsky, I just don't think he has the talent profile that's so rare that I target it if I'm a lottery team, right? But if I'm a team that has a lot of scoring already in the system and I'm kind of happy with it, and I want something that maybe is more of a glue guy, then yeah, I'm more interested in Dvorsky, right? Like, this is a bit of a crazy comparison, but like I remember what people were saying about Cole Perfetti, right? Like a guy who's now a top 6 winger, I want to say, for the Winnipeg Jets these days, like a really important NHL role. And people were questioning him because of his skill level, really, and like his pace of his game and his skating, and it was just all sort of very sort of tentative or tenuous, I would say. And with Dvorsky, I don't think Dvorsky is Cole Perfetti, right? Like I don't think that's true at all. But what I do see in Dvorsky is a guy who may not be the best skater or high-paced guy, but similar to Perfetti in a way, has the traits around him to make it work. Like, Dvorsky does have really good offensive transition results. Most of that is from being pretty smart. Like, he's a smart skill guy. Like, he's not awfully skilled, but he's not terrible with his hands, right? I think what he does really well is adapts to pressure very, very well. He has a good mental map of where guys are on the ice, and he can dish pucks really effectively. He passes pucks across blue lines better than most guys I've tracked. He carries pucks across blue lines okay, but that skill level does hold him back. But I do think Dvorsky, like, I don't know, if you want to say to me that Dalibor Dvorsky is going to play 3rd or 4th line center in the NHL, he's got the size, he's already over 200 pounds, like, he's got the frame to do it. He's a really good positionally defensive center as well. So I think he could project into that role. And then on the power play, like on your first or second unit, you have him on the wings. Then I absolutely see Dalibor Dvorsky being a guy that could be worth drafting higher than I have him ranked. But to me, I look at a lot of other guys where I would be rather making a gamble on them or taking the bet on them. I think he's a projectable pick, but I mean, I get the feeling like if someone drafts him at 10th or 11th overall, it's like, you know what? Okay, go nuts. I'm not doing it, but by all means, go crazy. And I think with Dvorsky, yeah, you're gonna see something similar. And I feel like he'll play in the NHL and play minutes, but I'm not sure exactly how much of a needle mover at 5-on-5 he'll be outside of a defense first solid transition guy. Okay, last question. Rank these players in regards to their pace from best to worst. Yeager, Ritchie, Dvorsky, Danielson, Barlow. Jeez, you're like really hardballing me here. I'll put Barlow last. Barlow, Ritchie, Yeager, Dvorsky, Danielson. I don't think Dvorsky is as slow as you're making him out to be, mostly because he's big, and I feel like big guys look a little slower, but he's certainly not quick and certainly not agile. But I feel like, I don't know, but Danielson I think is top of the heap on that one, based on what I've seen of him once in a while. Have you seen any Cole Yzerman and Macklin Celebrini this year? I feel like they aren't being talked about enough. Well, they're not being talked about enough because that's the 2024 draft. Nobody's even talking about the 2023 draft outside of crazy weird circles like this one, right? Like, it's a small world talking about the NHL draft these days, and nobody cares about 2024 really. And how many times have we been burned talking about 2024 guys a year in advance? But that, I mean, I don't know. Like they're really, really good players. I feel like next year's draft is going to be solid based on what I've seen. But yeah, I'm not surprised nobody's really talking about those guys, especially because none of them play in Canada. But in any case, they're fun. After winning the draft lottery and picking Bedard, any potential steals center-wise for the Wings to pick up in the late first or early second round? Well, who's been playing center is the good question. I mean, you might get a decent player in like a second round pick and with a Martin Michkov. That would be fun. He's always a pretty decent. He could be a decent bottom six guy. But like if you really want to aim for upside, like maybe I don't know Denver Barkey, but I doubt that that's the Red Wings style. I mean Bradley Nadeau might be a nice bet if he slips to the second round. I like Luca Pinelli a lot. And again, if you're not afraid of size, Luca Pinelli could be a good one. If Otto Stenberg falls out of the first round, we'll say Otto Stenberg, because if Otto Stenberg falls out of the first round, the Detroit Red Wings are just going to draft him and see what happens, because that's just what the Detroit Red Wings do. So we'll say Otto Stenberg and move on with our lives, because there's an idea for a potential steal in the second round that people are writing off. Dmitry Simashev versus Simon Edvinsson. That's a very interesting thought. I mean, I kind of want Simashev to play a little bit more like Simon Edvinsson, I guess, if that answers your question. I see personally a maybe bit more skill with Simon Edvinsson and maybe a bit more skating refinement with Edvinsson, but Simashev is not far behind. Simashev, I think, is more filled out, and I think Simashev is better defensively. But Edvinsson was, I'd say, like good defensively in terms of leading with his stick checks and finishing physically decently well, turning pucks around and getting going the opposite direction. Like, he did that pretty well. Simashev, I think, is a bit better at that. But once the puck is across the offensive blue line, very rarely is Simashev really doing much with it. And that leads to a bit of a lack of offensive potential. But boy, I've still seen what I've seen out of him over the last 2 years, and he has a lot of capability to do a lot, and I think Edvinsson has been sort of flexing that a little bit more over the years to his benefit, and I would like to see the same trend out of Simashev. If the Chychrun trade happens tonight while you're live, will we get live reactions and opinions? I mean, yeah, but with trades and stuff, like, I don't really like, reacting immediately, right? Like, you kind of gotta do your due diligence, at least for me, in a position of, like, I'm an information provider, right? Like, everybody has takes right away, but I feel like it's better to be like, let's let this sit for a bit, like think about this from a few different perspectives rather than just my own, and see where it goes and see what I really believe or see what, let's see what happens here. But I mean, yeah, I'll have thoughts initially for sure. When are the reports coming? Probably next month. We're coming down to it. But yeah, next month. Nikita Nedopiokin. I've seen him a bit. Haven't really loved him that much, really. Him and not Rimashevsky, the other guy, Remazovsky. Those two guys on St. Petersburg, I just haven't really been a huge fan of, to be honest. Shadow Gaming. Hello. What are your thoughts on Matthew Maggio of the Windsor Spitfires? I follow lots of OHL hockey, and this kid seems like he'd be a huge offensive threat for the Islanders. Yeah, I'm a huge Matt Maggio fan. When the Islanders drafted him last year, I had not really seen much of him. Like, he was a re-entry guy. I hadn't seen much of him. But what I saw, I really liked. He was one of the re-entry guys that I had not seen that was drafted last year that I thought might legitimately be a thing. And he's looked great with Windsor this year. Again, like, NHL upside is always really questionable with high-flying OHL guys that are now turning 20. This is kind of the expectation for guys like Maggio, but the fact that he was a re-entry draft pick, he gives you a leg up for the Islanders, I think, over a lot of other players that were drafted in that range. And yeah, I think he's a good pickup, and as good a bet as any in that range. But I've really, really, really enjoyed him with Windsor this year. I've seen on the Habs AMA, you said your opinion of Michkov has changed. Has his KHL play been significantly better? Yes, it has. I honestly think it has. Like with St. Petersburg, like he was trying to be the hero every single night, right? Like not he was not really doing much defensively at all. And then when the puck would hit his stick, he was trying to do everything on his own. He'd cross the defensive blue line, cross the offensive blue line, not really have a lot of deception or speed in his stride there, just kind of like motoring, but not really going quick up the ice, and try to challenge guys one-on-one. And if he couldn't get through that, he'd just fire it into their shin pads from distance or whatever. A lot of his offense came from like off puck play and following up on rebounds, and to a certain extent that's true in the KHL for sure. I've noticed a lot of the actual scoring he's doing is not always off of, just a lot of hard work on his end. It's just right place, right time, or rebounds, or silly, weird plays where he's just right there to bury it, which is fine. Those are still points. But with Michkov, I mean, what I've seen out of him, a lot more back checking, like a lot more support along the boards in the defensive end, like not hanging out in the neutral zone anymore, waiting around for breakout passes or errant breakouts or whatever. Just always, he's working a lot more, and part of a much more structured system that I think benefits him pretty well. I still don't think he's perfect. I don't, but I definitely see the top 10 guy at worst, that I think everyone has kind of hoped there was. But I still stand by the analysis that I had leading into this, right? Like, I think I don't know, unless I'm blind, he's a very different player with Sochi than he was with St. Petersburg. And what version in the NHL you're going to get? I hope it's the Sochi one, and I imagine it will be, because you can just say like this, the way he plays in the KHL is what you're going to need out of him in the NHL. It might, in my opinion, it might limit just how many opportunities he'll get to score in the NHL, but it's a good thing for him to learn of, you can't just do everything yourself, and you can't just be the guy who shoots the puck all the time and expect results in the NHL and expect players to like playing with you, because it was very much, I'm going to do what I want, and even if it doesn't work, no one really cares because I'm in the VHL and I'm on St. Petersburg and blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't know. It was just very strange. But watching him with Sochi has been very, very different. And again, like, I don't know. I still stand by where I was. And I again, this is exactly what I said was going to happen, right? Like, he's going to go to Sochi. I'm going to put him where I would have him based on his play with the VHL, which was lower than I have him now. And we'll see. He'll work his way back up. And within about, I'd say 3 games of seeing him in the KHL, it was very different. And I'm going, okay, like, this kid knows when and how to play good high-level hockey that chips in at both ends and does a lot of things really well. So, yeah. He's been much better, in my opinion. Yeah. Hypothetically, if the Blues pick Nate Danielson and Riley Heidt with their first 2-round picks, what would be your grade for those 2 picks, assuming they're picked at like 10th and 28th? Well, if Riley Heidt goes 10th overall and Nate Danielson at 28, that's a solid, I'd say, like A-. I like Nate Danielson at 28. I have him ranked around there, but his upside is higher than that for sure, 100%. And Riley Heidt is a huge upside pick. The only thing is, like, with Nate Danielson, you get 1 more year of junior, really. You don't really want Nate Danielson as an overager in the WHL if he's a first-round pick. And so I get the feeling he's going to be in the AHL after next season, and he's still got some stuff to learn and figure out, I think, to really become more of a complete player. But he's perfectly capable of it. I feel like Danielson might be a guy that goes 25th, 26th, or 28th overall, like you said, and outperforms that draft slot like immediately after this season. I've got a lot of time for Danielson to be higher on my list than he is, for sure. And Heidt, yeah, 10th overall, like, Heidt makes sense. He's just a pure offensive guy that can score, set up plays. He's not going to be, I don't think he's going to be a primary line driver at 5-on-5, but he'll be a very good member of a line. Thoughts on Lane Hudson? I mean, he's sick. He's a ton of fun and having a great season. Everything has been said about Lane Hudson this season and more. Thoughts on Konsta Helenius? Yeah, so Konsta Helenius is a 24 eligible Finn. Probably the best Finnish player available for next year, I would say, except for Aaron Kiviharju. Like, that isn't named Aaron Kiviharju. I think he's at the top of that list. I don't think I think he's a good, skilled player. He kind of reminds me a little bit of how a guy like maybe a Grayson Sachin plays hockey, like maybe not the highest pace guy, but he's got skill and quickness and a good offensive touch and everything that can really sort of produce points. But I want to see Konsta Helenius in Liga before I like jump to any insane conclusions about him, because I don't know, I watched him internationally at the World Junior A, or was it the Five Nations or some recent international tournament that the Finns were at, and he was okay, but kind of underwhelming based on the production going in and what I had seen going into that tournament. Can you describe your interpretation of tier groups in this year's draft? Oh yeah, sure. So, I mean, to me, tier 1 is just Connor Bedard, because Connor Bedard is going to be one of these players who, when people ask me to compare Connor Bedard to someone, my answer is there isn't any. Like, he's just Connor Bedard. Like, he has a playing style that I don't think I've seen before. So he just is who he is, right? Like, and that's a tier of your own, right? Like, when you're the type of player and you watch them and you're like, this guy just does his own thing and it's really incredible, and I don't know if anyone can do what he does at his level at this age. Like, he has deficiencies, but I don't care because of the strengths. Fantilli at 2, again, on his own, because I think at any other year, this would be Adam Fantilli's draft. Like, I love him. I think his potential is enormous. I think at the end of the day, you give it a long time, and I think there will be discussions about, yes, maybe among the fringes of hockey culture, but it's like when you look back on Bedard versus Fantilli, like, I think there are some arguments you might be able to make where you're like, these two guys, they do different things extremely well, but you probably want Bedard, but maybe these guys were closer than we thought, just based on what I've seen out of Fantilli. Like, the last game I did of him, which was post-World Junior, he was spectacular. He was amazing. And Connor Bedard, the game I did today, he was also excellent. He was just continuously Connor Bedard. So to me, Adam Fantilli is a potential number 1 center, right? Like, a guy that you win with. He's got some lessons to learn, I think, and some experience to gain, but the upside is enormous. Connor Bedard is just Connor Bedard. Like, he just is a potentially franchise-altering talent, I think, especially in terms of scoring. Adam Fantilli could alter your franchise too, but just in different ways, right? Like, he just fills the middle of your... the Columbus Blue Jackets need a guy like Adam Fantilli so frickin' bad up the middle of their team to round out the scoring wingers they've got and they've drafted over the years. Like, I don't know. I love it. And Carlson, Benson, Moore, Michkov, Crystal, Smith, Simishev, Sandin, Pelika, and Brindley are the next tier for me. To me, those are all sort of top 6 guys, right? Like, maybe not elite all-around NHL players, but I think those guys will fit into a top 6 or top 2 pairs in some way, right? Like, I think Dmitry Simishev could be a great second pair defenseman, like a great one. Axel Sandin Pelika might be a really good offensive top pair guy. Oliver Moore and Matvei Michkov and Andrew Crystal and Will Smith, like top 6 guys. If you don't get an Adam Fantilli, like Oliver Moore makes a ton of sense, for example. Leo Carlson, maybe not a number 1 center, but a good number 2, an excellent number 3 if you've got like a contending team, something like that. Tier 4 to me are guys that I think if things go right, they could end up top 6 guys, and if things don't go right, they could really struggle. So that's like Jaden Perron and Mikhail Gulyayev. Ryan Leonard is another example. I want to have Timur Mukhanov be a guy that I could put in my top 6, but I feel like he could still be a good bottom 6 guy, so he's part of that group. Riley Heidt is in there because, again, he could be a top 6 guy, and I don't really see him in a bottom 6 doing too great, and he's still got some work to do. And Otto Stenberg joined that group not too long ago based on how he's played in the SHL from what I've seen. Tier 5, I think, is just a lot of guys that could be, solid second pair defensemen, guys like Reinbacher and Molendyk and Willander, or just sort of like good middle of the lineup plug and play guys that can play a role really well, right? Like Callum Ritchie fits that, I think, really well. Edward Chalet. There's some guys sprinkled in here that I think have a tremendous amount of upside, but really carry a lot of risk. So Nate Danielson is one of those. I think William Whitelaw is the epitome of that. Daniel Boot, I think, is another good example. So to me, tier 5 is just like a lot of guys that you can plug and play, while also a lot of guys where you're just swinging home run swings. And then from 6 onwards to me for tiers is just like potential depth guys, curiosity cases. Andrew Strothman is in there because like Strothman plays like Cale Makar, but he's not Cale Makar, and I'd be fascinated to see how that works out in the future. So it's like, could he be an NHL player? Maybe. Yeah, I could see it. But like if he is one, he could be really good. But that's a long shot, I think, to play that way in the NHL, and I'll be interested to see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, beyond that, there's a lot of guys that just could fill lineups. But yeah, Bedard, I think, alters your franchise right away. Fantilli, I think, could do the same thing in different ways. Tier 3, I think, are just really good top end of your lineup dudes that can go out and score or go out and do a role really, really well. Tier 4 is like riskier versions of that, I would say, with like the same upside, but like a bit more risk. And 5 is like good plug and play guys that can play in the middle of your lineup, or guys that are literally like home run swings at a baseball in the dark coming at you at 80 miles an hour. Okay. When will the first scouting reports of 2023 be uploaded? Hopefully next month. That's what I'm hoping for. Could Leo Carlsson pass Fantilli? I don't think so, personally. I don't think so. In the midst of a negotiation in our fantasy league and moving jersey. Well, I mean, you're airing your trade discussions on the internet there, Scotty. So, good luck to you, though. Zach, hello. I see you watch Gavin Brindley. Please tell me why he'll be a second-round pick. Because he's not big and up until recently not scoring. I mean, it blew my mind that after the World Junior that he had, like, for example, Craig Button, who was there, still had Gavin Brindley in the middle of the second round. Like, that to me just, like, blew my mind. But I get the feeling that teams look at him, and similar to Nick Robertson, they go, yeah, but he's small and plays like he's 6'3" and crushing guys, so he's going to get hurt all the time, and he's too much. Which, reasonable, sure, but for me, I'm not putting myself in the position to look at a player that good and go, yeah, I don't think it's going to work for you, bud. Sorry. Like, who are you? Who are you to say that? He's awesome. Like, Gavin really rocks. He does what could be. There's some things he could do better, but there are certainly 32 players that are worse than him. Wait, what am I trying to say here? There are if he goes in the second round, there are certainly players that will have gone before him that are worse. That's what I'm trying to say. Thoughts on Charlie Serrato? Yeah, so Charlie Serrato was actually really interesting. I liked him. I moved him up off the watch list, but only barely. He's a long shot to me, but he did a lot of things really well, right? Like, he's a really good procedural guy, smart passer, quick on his feet, agile. He's got skill. He's intense at both ends of the ice. Sorry, I have a lingering tickle in my throat from this illness I had. Where was I? Oh yeah, Charlie Serrato. But once the puck is in the offensive zone is kind of where things kind of evaporate for Serrato. Like, I watched him in that game, and he had one really good look from, I think, long range, but it was like a shot. It was an assist from the corner, I think, that came out of the corner, across the goal mouth, across the middle of the ice, and Serrato was sort of streaking in from across the blue line and caught and released it and, like, flubbed it so hard, like, missed wide, and it was not a hard shot, and he stopped it to, like, gain control of the puck and still flubbed it. And then again later in the game had a pretty good look standing still and just is not a threatening offensive player really right now. But he does a lot of things really well. So to me, I look at that and go, okay, look, like, maybe you draft him in the late rounds, but I would be very interested to keep tabs on him in college if he goes undrafted or if he is a guy that has a longer development curve. Like, he's a guy where if a team drafts him in like the 6th or 7th round, I'm excited, even if fans might look at it and go, yeah, but he's not scoring a ton of points and like he played very few minutes. But I'm sitting there going like, yeah, he's going to go to college next year and maybe score 5 points, 6 points, right? Like, I don't think he's going to go to college and hit the ground running. But in 3rd or 4th year of college, then you're maybe looking at a player that moves the needle a lot more once he's had 2, 3, 4 years to really develop and really sort of build on the finishing part of the game, where I think he kind of lacks, because he does a lot of the other stuff pretty well. Question time. Have you watched Trey Augustine? I know I like him, but what do you think? Yeah, I like Trey Augustine. I've seen a bit of him over the year. His data looks really, really good. Again, I haven't updated this in a while. It's almost the middle of the month. So the middle of the month is when I update all this supplementary data. The derived data that I pull from my various sources using my own with my own metrics. What is his name? Trey Augustine. Yeah, like he's got really good save percentages from dangerous areas, and his save percentage is really strong. And when I've watched tape of him, it's like, yeah, I like Trey Augustine. The rebound control, the technical ability, just staying calm in the net. Like, he seems to check a lot of boxes. And yeah, like, again, I'm not sure how I feel about drafting junior goaltenders, but he's a pretty good one. And if he's there in the second round and he's the third, fourth guy I'm drafting, yeah, I'm all about it. Current Matejchuk versus Michkov thoughts. I mean, I take Michkov over Matejchuk for sure. I don't know. I wasn't huge on Matejchuk last year. And Michkov, like, when Michkov was good last year, he was awesome. Like, Michkov just had this weird season last year where, like, some games he was kind of boring and didn't really do much. Other games he was just absolutely off the chain, going offensively, making plays, attacking the front of the net, like really doing a lot of stuff, playing physical defensively and carrying pucks really well. Whereas there were other games where he just was kind of invisible. And now that the team around him is a lot better, it makes sense that his production is getting a lot better. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I look at Denton Matejchuk and see a guy who kind of has free ability to do whatever he wants in the WHL, and I don't know what kind of an NHL forward he's going to be, or an NHL defenseman he's going to be, but maybe he's a forward. I don't know. But I'm saying, as a defenseman, I just don't really know what he's going to do. And I don't know. I see more physical tools in Michkov. I see more deception and creativity out of him. Matejchuk is sort of just a high energy, sort of puck carrying guy who, attacks and activates in the offensive zone like a lot. And I don't really see as much of that out of Michkov. And I don't know. I've always leaned more in the Michkov side of things. Who's my top 10 as of today? I'll tell you. As of today, Bedard, Fantilli, Carlson, Benson, Moore, Michkov, Crystal, Smith, Simishev, Sandy Pelican. What makes Grayson Sachin rise into being a first-round rated prospect? The top prospects game was, I mean, you don't want to put too much thought into one game, but he came out and was like, I can actually really play hockey. You want to see? Like, I watched games of him going in. I think he's gotten better as the year has gone on as well. Like, the first games I watched of him this season was very sort of lackluster. Like, he just kind of lacked pace and separation ability and everything. And I had a video coach in the WHL reach out to me and be like, I think you might need to go back and look at Grayson Sachin a little more, like, because he's getting better. And I think they had just played against them in a series or something. And he was basically saying, like, go check him out again and, like, pay attention to the details. And because he did put up pretty good data, but it wasn't like spectacular. And let me just check where I'm at here with Sachin. Yeah, like, the data for Sachin isn't really spectacular, and that to me is a bit concerning, where it's like, okay, he's got a lot of things that he does really well. Like, for example, his ability to get through pressure using his skill level is really, really good. And he's not the quickest or most agile or highest pace guy, but he just adapts to play so well. And I think in the top prospects game, you saw sort of like another level of that, where it's like, okay, now I kind of see what this kid is capable of. And if his skating does improve a little bit, then, like, he could be a heck of an offensive player. I mean, he's, again, like, I'll need to do more work on him. I've only done a few games of him. Like, I've done 3 games, 45 minutes of 5-on-5 time, and he's been solid. And in the games I've watched and not tracked, like, again, he's been good. And in the top prospects game, he was spectacular. So I feel like he's gotten better as the season goes on. So we'll see what happens with him. But, I mean, I could see him sneak into the first round, right? Like, he's in my first round because I'm betting on the skill level and the creativity and the ability to stitch plays together over some of the other guys that maybe may be a little more safe, I would say. But I like him a lot, and I've come around on him quite a bit since the beginning of the year. Have you caught any of Frank Nazar's return? Super excited he's back. I have not. Frank Nazar the third. Yeah, but I am excited he's back as well. Are you more skeptical on Whitelaw because of his commitment to Wisconsin? No, because you never know. I mean, Cole Caulfield went to Wisconsin, right? Like, and I believe Wisconsin actually has some other guys coming with him. Let me see here. Wisconsin. What's his name? Oh yeah, their team next year. Yeah, like Aiden Fink is going there. You know, Luke Lewandowski is a pretty decent skill guy as well. I love that Brady Cleveland is going there as well. That's just hilarious. You know, like they're gonna have a bit of a younger team, but you know, Boston Buckberger is a guy that is capable of producing offense as well. Yeah, he's with Lincoln right now, but he's capable of producing offense. Like it's not awful, and maybe this is sort of a sign of like Wisconsin turning a corner. But you know, I don't know. I'm not gonna write it off. But if he goes through college for a season and it's not great, and he leaves because the team is bad or whatever, then that's not great for his development. But you know, I'm optimistic because you have to be, right? Like he's going there. He's a really talented player. And so for me, it's like if I'm drafting him, I'm talking to him a lot, right? Like I'm watching a lot of his tape, I'm watching a lot of his games, you know, and just sort of staying in contact with him and just sort of, you know, bringing him along. And if there's something that's at odds with Wisconsin there, it's like, you know, you at least have the relationship to fall back on of like, no, we really believe in you. You know, even if the results aren't great, we still think there's something there, because obviously with him, like the talent is not the question. It's going to take a while, I think, for Whitelaw to come along regardless. Thoughts on Josh Filmon? I have not seen anything of Filmon this year. I know you have the New Jersey Devils avatar and he's scoring a ton of points. Really good shooter. That's what I remember from last year. But other than that, I felt he was kind of okay. But he's been better this season, apparently. Any defense outside of round one who you think could be steals this year, like Hudson last year? I mean, if Dmitry Simishev goes outside round one, then yes. Mikhail Gulyayev maybe goes outside round one. Luka Cagnoni outside round one is, I would say, a certainty. Tanner Molendyke might be a good swing in the second round, something like that. Like I had Lane Hudson in the early 20s, I think, last year, and he slipped to the end of the second round. So like, you know, a guy like Cagnoni at the end of the second round would be a very similar trajectory, but they're not similar players, and I'm not as excited, I don't think, about Cagnoni as I was about Lane Hudson at the draft time, that is. Thoughts on Arttu Karki? Yeah, I mean, Arttu Karki is one of the first guys I tracked this year because I liked him at the World Under-18s last year when he went. And I know he's scoring a ton of points, but one thing that is very important to keep in mind, and Elite Prospects doesn't split these up, and they probably should, but the Finnish Junior League is really big at the beginning of the year, and then it splits in half into two pieces halfway through the year. And Karki's production has really slowed since that has happened, and I'm not surprised. Like, he's a guy who I think has enough skill and enough pace and enough size and enough power to just overwhelm lower-level opponents at the level at the Finnish junior level. But when I watch him, I'm going, I don't know, like, I would really like to see him in Liga, like, to see how he does there, because he's a guy who I just don't think has enough, like, of it. You know what I mean? Like, he's a decent shooter. He's a decent skilled defenseman, but he's not a high-paced guy. He's not a particularly careful passer in the games I've seen him. He just kind of is there and can get around guys at this level, and not in a way where I'm sitting there convinced, like, okay, but when he goes to Liga, yeah, he'll be able to do the same thing. Or when he goes to the CHL or whatever. Like, I think he could be a solid CHL import draft pick if he wants to come and play in North America, for sure. but I don't think there's like massive upside with Arttu Karki. And I came into this season really liking him, so maybe there's something there that I'm missing, and I think it is time where I do circle back on him. But he's one of these guys where every time I circle back on him, I'm going, okay, yeah, this is why I don't have him ranked, and like this is, but he is probably one of the best players that I don't have ranked, right? Like I think of all the guys that I don't have ranked, and he's probably the best one. It's him and maybe like Tyler Peddle, Matthew Cataford, like those guys are probably the best ones that I don't have ranked on my list. And that could change by the end of the year. Should we be worried that Slafkovsky didn't produce points this season? No. Look, Yuri Slafkovsky was always going to be a 3-year thing, right? Like maybe more. He is not, like, again, there are reasons he wasn't scoring a ton of points last year in Finland. Yes, he scored goals with the Slovakian team, but again, this is why I say, like, points are one thing, but how the points are produced is even more important, right? Like, you have to look at what is happening on the ice and see what the player is contributing to, right? Like, yes, Slafkovsky had 7 goals in 7 games, but nothing else. Why? Dig into why. And when I watched his tape from that Olympic tournament, I could see why. And when you see him in the NHL, like my read on him in the NHL draft was like, yeah, he could play in the NHL next year. He's a great puck protector. He's big and he's strong and he knows how to use it pretty well. But like in terms of an offensive producer, he's not really doing a whole lot of that in Liga. So I'm not really expecting him to immediately start doing it in the NHL. He's been about what I expected. Like, he wasn't a player that I had in my top 3. He wasn't a player that I expected to be in the NHL right away. Like, I figured they'd give him another year in Finland to give him some breathing room, like on big ice, not in one of the biggest hockey markets in the world with every single eyeball trained on him every single night. And you just go and be like, hey, we just want you like taking more risks, being more confident, like use your skill to your ability, get quicker. All these things that I thought would make Slafkovsky sort of the best version of himself that he could be. I'm personally not worried about it. I think that Montreal knows what they're doing overall as an organization these days. So yeah, I mean, I look at Slafkovsky and go, yeah, it's okay. He's coming along, but there were going to be growing pains, right? Like, he's a big boy. And like watching him at the junior level last year in Finland, you see how he scores so many points at that level, but again, like the men's level is different. And again, I also think that the NHL and Liga are year over year, like getting more and more wide of a gap. And, you need to be like an Alex Barkov style player in that league at that age to like project right into the NHL. And even Barkov took a couple of years to really hit his stride. So I'm not super concerned. This is about what I expected out of him this year. Rumor has it Karlsson could be traded to Edmonton. What Edmonton prospect would you want in return? That's a good question. I mean, man, I can't imagine the Edmonton Oilers are signing up, like adding the Erik Karlsson trade to their team, right? Like they've already got Tyson Barrie. They've already got Tyson Barrie, Philip Broberg, and Evan Bouchard on their team, and they're adding another, I would say, questionable defensive player. I know Broberg's gotten a little bit better, but that adds more offense to their defense, which that's not really fixing their problem. But, whatever. And I just can't imagine that the Edmonton Oilers, if they want to win a Stanley Cup, that they're going to and like stay competitive for the next, say, 2 seasons while Draisaitl's under contract, saddle themselves with Erik Karlsson, who is having an extraordinary season. But, like, are we all, like, amnesia ridden? Like, he's still got 4 more years left on his deal at $11.5 million at the age of 32. That to me just doesn't sound like sound finance. Even if they retain half, you've got a $5.75 million defenseman for the next 4 years that's 32 and has been bad over the last few years, far more than he's been good this year. I don't know. It just seems like a lot of risk, and I wouldn't want to pay a lot if I'm the Edmonton Oilers. But if I really had to take him, I mean, if they retained half and took back like Tyson Barrie, and you made the money, like you make it so that you are thinking about it from the perspective of, we're paying a yearly salary of, let's say, $1.5 million more to upgrade from Tyson Barrie to Erik Karlsson, and they're retaining half and we're saddling them with Tyson Barrie for 2 years. Like, you pay a lot, I think, for that, right? Like, I think that makes a little bit more sense, because like they're not, I don't know why you would take like a Brent Kulak back or a Cody Ceci, like unless Cody Ceci is part of a package that goes back to San Jose for Erik Karlsson, but I don't know why Edmonton would do that. I mean, yeah, like do you send a Puljujarvi back in that? Like, if you waive Puljujarvi and he clears waivers, do you send him to San Jose? But you probably don't want to do that, because San Jose probably doesn't want to acquire Jesse Puljujarvi just because he clears waivers so they can put a $3 million NHL player in the minors. That doesn't make sense either to me. So, I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here. Like, you're not going to get Evan Bouchard. You're probably not going to get Philip Broberg out of it. You're probably not getting Dylan Holloway, because, like, if I'm Edmonton, the perceived leverage that San Jose has, San Jose clearly is just trying to sell high, right? Like, they got a guy who looked like one of the worst contracts in the league, and just like that, he's turned it around. They're looking to get rid of him, right? Like, they could get stuff for him. So, you know, if I'm shipping back like Tyson Barrie and getting a retained Erik Karlsson, would I throw in a Reed Schaefer? I feel like the Sharks would really like a Reed Schaefer. You know, Reed Schaefer, Carter Savoy, and a first-round pick, and maybe a first-round pick later if Karlsson helps them make the playoffs like 2 years from now or something. You know, like something crazy like that, where I'm like, I want insurance that if I give you more assets to land him and he stinks in a couple of years, we're not paying you a ton for this player. Like, I don't know. The San Jose Sharks are still kind of back against the wall right now with Karlsson, in my opinion, even though he's having such a great season. Like, it's such a crazy, weird season for him. I don't know what I would do. I want to see the trade happen, though, because it would be awesome. And I have no idea what's going to happen, but it would be great. How does your data compare and contrast Danielson and Yeager? So let me just get that going. So Braden Yeager, the game I did this week was more of the same. But it was probably the better game of Yeager that I've seen all season. Like, I see Danielson as much more of a straight line puck possession guy. So he carries the puck a lot more in transition, a lot more than Yeager does. He's a lot more efficient at it than Yeager. Yeager loses the puck in transition a ton relative to Danielson. Danielson also is just a much more active passer, especially in the offensive zone. Like, Yeager is much more of a shoot first guy. Like, he's getting himself, he's a rush offense and shoot at the end of that rush guy. Whereas Nate Danielson is a rush guy, get along the boards and send a puck to the middle of the ice from the boards type player. I do see kind of where they're similar and they're ranked similarly on my board. But they do contribute about the same to their team's offensive output. But in terms of like dangerous playmaking, Danielson does it a lot better. And in terms of getting the puck into the offensive zone and participating defensively, there's a lot more going on with Danielson than Yeager, for sure. And I think Danielson's shot is undervalued. And I think Yeager's shot is very good, but I'm not sure it's like, you know, this massive high upside type thing. Have you seen any Devin Kaplan this year? And if so, highlights? No, I have not. But I know he's been doing well, and I'm very happy about that. I've really liked Devin Kaplan for a long time, and I thought the potential in his game was really, really high. Yeah, like he's having a good freshman year, 19 points in 28 games at a good school. Like, he's having a good season. Again, he's another guy where it's going to take some time. You know, big guys, often good, powerful, big players can take time to like learn what they're capable of and get quicker and more skilled and also remain strong on their feet. Like, But that combination of traits is very desirable, and I felt that Kaplan was a guy that could carry those traits. Where did I see that he was a 4th round draft pick? 3rd. Okay, that makes more sense. 3rd round makes sense for him. Like an early 3rd round pick. Yeah, that seems reasonable. The highest floor player in the draft this year, probably Leo Carlson, if not Connor Bedard. Like, he's just like Connor Bedard. You put him on your first line on the wing, and you put him on your first unit power play, he's going to score 100 points. Like something like that. I don't know. Like he just has the shot. He has the vision. He has the passing ability where he's just at the very worst, he's going to score points, and everybody loves points. Is Kasper Halttunen ranked too high on most lists? I don't see a first rounder there. Do you think Haminaho has a better chance of playing in the NHL? Yes, and yeah, I think he's ranked too high. I don't really like Halttunen at all. And Haminaho, I am sort of iffy on him. I mean, on the Substack, I did a review of World Junior Draft eligibles, and Haminaho was a guy that I originally was a lot lower on. But then when I started watching the video of him at the World Juniors, yeah, I can kind of see a thing there with Haminaho. I've always kind of liked Haminaho with over Halttunen over the last 2 years. But Haminaho, to say he's been like great, I think is a bit of an overstatement. I think he's been a good physical checking forward, and I don't buy the production that he puts up, but I think he could be a good complementary physical guy in the NHL. Halttunen could be the same, but he's not. I watch Halttunen play, and I'm going, he's one of those guys where it's old school NHL. If you're looking for physical guys that can battle to the front of the net and bash pucks in front of the net, and you don't really want to worry about the rest of the game, and you just want a guy who runs around chasing guys and hitting guys and getting penalty minutes, you could draft a Kasper Halttunen. Like he's fine, but I'm not drafting him personally. And if he goes in the first round, and I mean I don't think I have him ranked, but if he goes in the first round, he'll probably play some games for that team. He'll maybe you get like a Will Carrier type player out of him. But I don't know. I look at Halttunen, and I'm not at all surprised that he's not really producing in Liga. And then I look at Haminaho, and I'm going, well, how is this guy producing so much? It's a bit strange, but that's just the way it is, to quote Bruce Hornsby. What's the best jersey you've seen today? Today? The Waterloo Blackhawks were wearing a green and yellow alternate that was pretty cool. This year you corrected. You know what? I really love the Vancouver Canucks reverse retros. Those are really cool. I thought the Edmonton Oilers reverse retros looked really cool on the ice. Honestly, Toronto's is also really cool. I'm trying to think of other ones. I will say the Moose Jaw Warriors, the Braden Yeager game I did, the Moose Jaw Warriors were wearing SpongeBob SquarePants themed jerseys, and they were terrible. Braden Yeager was playing on a line. He wears number 29. He was on a line, I think, with a guy that wears 21, and I could not tell. The numbers were so wide and thick that I could not tell who was who. And I had to watch that game like twice to like get the data right. It drove me nuts. But I have too much pride and not enough patience to just delete that game and enter a new one into the database. So I did it. But that was awful. Terrible, terrible. I love SpongeBob, but just a terrible design for their potato cameras in the arena. What are your thoughts on Grant McCagg's wild list? I have not seen it. I don't think. I wonder if he's blocked me yet. Probably not. Apparently not. No, he is not. Let's see. I don't see it. I do not see a list provided, so I will just say that I have not seen it, and I'm sure it's entertaining. What are your thoughts on Tristan Bertucci? From what I've seen, he looks solid, but doesn't have too many outstanding traits that make him projectable easily. You've pretty much nailed it. Bertucci, to me, is a guy. I know I saw Brock Otten tweeting about him and posting clips. I mean, there was like one of them was him shooting it from the point and someone cleaning it up and scoring points. Like, okay, like cool. But I don't know. I don't see much out of Tristan Bertucci. like he's a good OHL defenseman, I would say. Like at the end of the day, like he could be one of the better defensemen in the OHL in 2 years, but just because he doesn't do anything necessarily wrong, he's a smart puck distributor, smart puck mover, but he's not. I don't see what's going to put him over the edge in the NHL. Similar to like a Dylan McKinnon type defenseman, where I see why an NHL team might draft them, but the NHL is very different from the OHL, and I feel like it's, you're kind of aiming low a little bit. Any thoughts on Tristan Bertucci, Alex Ferrand, and Andre Loshko? So Ferrand, we just talked about Bertucci. Alex Ferrand, I don't know. I feel like Ferrand could be a good skill guy that scores in the OHL, but kind of struggles down the road. Decently skilled, but not necessarily the best, with his footwork and evasion and agility, especially for a kid his size. I've liked Ferrand in the past. He's caught my eye a few times, but then when I watch him in detail and watched the Wolves a little bit this year when he was there, it was just kind of a mixed bag. But it's been a while, so I might circle back on him. Andre Loshko, I watched him this week on someone else's recommendation, and I don't really see it. Decent finisher, good nose for space in the offensive zone. Like I can see how he's scoring points, but not, when I look, he's another one of these guys like Bertucci, right? Where I'm going, okay, I like him. These guys aren't bad hockey players, but like at the end of my list, I've got like, Andre Molnar, Caden Shahan, Kerry Terrence, and, Hoyt Stanley and Oliver Bonk. And am I drafting all those guys over Tristan Bertucci or Alex Ferrand or Andre Loshko? Like, yeah, for sure. Like, Brady Cleveland is at the tail end of my list. I'm absolutely going for Brady Cleveland because I know what role I would want him playing in the NHL, and he's a big guy who can skate pretty well that can play a role in the NHL that I would love to see him play because he's hilarious. But the rest of it's just a matter of like, who am I passing on? And to me, there's just a lot of guys that I'll have ahead of those guys. Any Minnesota State High School League players or Minnesota State High School League, is that what that stands for, that you've looked at or been told to check out? Gavin Thorson kind of interests me a little bit, and I think he's at Eden Prairie. If I'm not mistaken. He's okay. Again, maybe on that list of like guys that are good but not quite good enough to be on the list. But I've liked him, and someone tipped me off on him at the USHL Fall Classic, and he's been okay. I haven't tracked any games outside of one of the first ones he played this year because he's been in high school, and I do not track high school games. But once he goes back to the USHL eventually, then I'll circle back on him. But he's the only one that really sticks out to me. I'm trying to think of others. High school's hard for me, really. I did look at a bunch of high schoolers that like popped up in my model, and there wasn't much there to me. So yeah. What do you think of Simashev's skating? I think it's got good signs. Like his mechanics are really good. His power is really good. His mobility is really good. But he is a bit clunky and slow. But I do think that, again, he's 6'5", like you can work on it. I think he's, for a 6'5", 17, 18-year-old kid, like he skates pretty darn well. And I think that you give him 3 or 4 years, it'll only get better. Brindley or Stankoven in their draft year? Stankoven. Have you seen any Matejchuk or Pickering this year? Watching all these dub guys that are draft eligible, I feel like I haven't heard much about them. I've seen Pickering here and there. I've seen Matejchuk here and there. I mean, they're still the same players, right? Like, Owen Pickering, I think, has gotten a little bit stronger. He's gotten a little bit better in terms of generating speed and separation ability. Matejchuk is still Denton Matejchuk to me. I mean, I haven't paid a ton of attention, but every time I've seen the Moose Jaw Warriors and noticed Matejchuk, I'm going, yeah, there goes Denton Matejchuk, activating from the blue line all the time, playing as if he's a forward in the offensive zone, not the best defensive player, lots of stuff going on there with both of those guys. What would you say is the reason we care more about the draft and young prospects versus the pro players? Well, I'll give you my answer. I mean, I love the NHL. I love to just sit back and watch the NHL. Like, when people ask me about takes and such in the NHL and everything, it's like, I don't know. With the NHL, I just sort of sit back and just watch and enjoy it and don't get really caught up in, like, who's better than whom and, like, oh, what about this player? And, like, what do you think about, like, whoever this player is and whatever. Like, I just sort of sit and watch it, right? Like, I don't really think about it. And I'd rather have it that way because I spend enough time scrutinizing young players. when I myself am not the best hockey player. I can skate, I can shoot a puck. I got terrible hands, but I'm a sizable dude, and I can skate, so that works. But these guys could all body me. But in terms of why the focus on the draft, at least for me, like, I have an obsession with like the future of things. You know, I've always been that way as a person. I always get excited at the cutting edge, right? Like, when I look at hockey, and when I started doing this and seeing, you know, I remember the days of like Dylan McIlwraith being a top 10 pick. And in my brain at the time going, that's probably a bad idea. And now I understand why that's such a bad idea. And seeing that shift, right? Like, seeing teams go in the 2014, 15, 16 drafts and go, let's just draft the guys that are good, you know, and like forget about all that narrative extra stuff. That let's see what happens, right? And seeing those players that were drafted in those drafts, like, completely transform the NHL is just so cool to me, right? Like, you see guys like a Connor McDavid and such just completely transforming the NHL. Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, and you know, and more recently guys like Trevor Zegras in multiple ways, transforming the NHL into something that is completely new. There's more offense, it's more fun. You know, it's more emotional, I think. Just maybe not in terms of like after the whistle intensity, but like there seems to be an uptick in just theatrics and dramatics in terms of score changes and momentum swings and all of this stuff, right? And I think that's the way it should be. So when I look at the draft, my thought is always about like, these kids are the future of the game, right? Like, in some combination, a group of players in this class of players will be major parts of the future of the National Hockey League and hockey as a whole. And that's really cool to me. You know, like, I grew up watching Star Trek. You know, I grew up loving Star Wars. I'm a big space nerd. I took astrophysics courses in university. Like, I'm obsessed with like the unknown and like what's out there and what's coming. And that always has really, really got me going. And maybe that's the same thing for you, but that's my answer to that. Do you think Yaniv Peretz gets a contract after the NCAA season? Is that the goalie who has like a 960 save percentage for the Army and has had that for like 4 years? Because that sounds familiar to me. Yeah, he's with Quinnipiac. Yeah, I mean, I think I did some numbers on Peretz a couple of years ago, and he was having a really easy go of it. But, I mean, he checks the boxes everywhere he goes. He stops the puck, and there's not much more you can ask. So I imagine someone will give him a contract. I mean, he still has NCAA eligibility, so he can go back to college for at least another year, and maybe he does that. But also, like, I don't remember the conference that Quinnipiac is in. If I forget, let's take a quick look. Quinnipiac. Yeah, they're in the East Coast Conference. So Quinnipiac is in an easier conference. That's another thing to keep in mind. But yeah, I imagine like an AHL deal makes more sense. Dr. Detroit, who would the Red Wings pick in the 2023 draft, and are some of their prospects? And are there some prospects that are legit? I mean, Detroit has so many prospects that some of them are legit, right? Like, I like William Wallinder. You know, Dmitry Buchelnikov is playing well. But I mean, I have no idea who the Red Wings are going to pick. Again, I don't know what's going to happen in the draft. I know that I would love to see a guy like Oliver Moore in a Red Wings jersey or something. That would be a lot of fun. But we'll see what happens closer to the date. Have you ever seen Les Claypool live, and did it make your brain wobble? I wish. I would give a lot to see Les Claypool live in concert. I don't think Primus tours that much anymore, but I've been a Primus fan since I was like 16. They're right up my alley. And being a bass player myself, Les Claypool has been in many a magazine when I was a kid that I had on my shelf. Can you chat about Stenberg? I haven't heard much about his style of play. Yeah, so Otto Stenberg is probably one of the weirdest players this season. Like, his under 20 games have been kind of meh. I think a big reason he's not really producing as well is because he's just not a great finisher at higher levels right now. But the skill level is very clear. He's very fast, very, very agile. And I think he does a lot of things well, but score points. And I feel like if you give him a few years to develop a better shot from standing still, develop a better shot in stride at that high speed, he could be really interesting. And I think there's a ton of upside with Stenberg. Like, if he falls to the second round, look out. Like, he's getting more comfortable in the SHL, I think. I think he also needs to sort of calm down a little bit on the ice at sometimes. Like, he was passing pucks to nobody a lot. And we'll see. I don't know. I really, really like Stenberg, and if he's a guy you draft in the second round, I'm hitting the buy button on that really, really hard, and I get the feeling the energy and the skill and the speed he's got will work itself out. He just needs some time. You leave him in Sweden for a few years, and I feel like it'll pay off. Magomed Sharakanov thoughts. Oh, God, Magomed. I loved Magomed coming into the season, and I was thrilled to watch him play, because when you watch some clips of him in isolation, he just, like... he has the capability to just embarrass his opponents, right? Like, one-on-one skill for a defenseman, I don't know in this draft, like, who is better. Maybe Simashev and Sandin Pellikka, but, like, you know, one-on-one, stepping up from the offensive blue line, like, I don't know. Andrew Strathman tries, but Magomed Sharakanov embarrasses. And, you know, Sharakanov is pretty much by far in the games I've tracked so far one of the more dangerous shooting defensemen I've tracked, so he steps up a lot and really sort of takes offensive risk that way. But by God, the rest of the picture is just bad. Like, the more I watch him, it's like, okay, like, I'm waiting for him to be able to run a breakout without skating it himself and taking on two guys at once and trying to skate through them with skill. And even then, it's not good enough where he can really do that. And that's at the MHL level. You know, would I draft him in the 7th round? Yeah, I would think about it, but like, you're betting long term on that, and you're betting on a lot of upside, but a very small chance of getting there. I know there was a couple of games he was playing wing, but I don't know, his puck carrying and the skill level, I'd want him playing D, but the deception and the ability to hit passes in stride and in transition and not taking on too much risk is bad. Like, it's all just bad for him. But he's fun. He's a lot of fun to watch. I hope he works out, because he is fun. Does Dvorsky remind you of Svechkov or Rubtsov? Everybody says high floor, but the floor is below NHL. Yeah, potentially. I could see that. How have Gulyayev and Rykov been? They were okay. I mean, I saw them not too long ago. Gulyayev had the best game I've seen him play all year. Well, that's that. Just a monster getting pucks up the ice and a pretty good shooter as well. Showed some defensive traits that I've been looking for out of him all year. There was some shocking stuff at the beginning of the year, but just the ability to use his feet to like cover ice defensively and clog up lanes and everything is just really, really good. And he's using it more now. Rykov, you know, late 2nd round guy. He's a very smart and dependable guy at both ends of the ice. I don't think there's a massive offensive producer there in the NHL, but like a decent third line 200-foot dude who you can plug and play at the center position or the wing and, you know, maybe kill some penalties. You know, I could see that out of Rykov. Thoughts on Will Cooley for the Rangers? Played a few games, but ripping it up for a rookie in the AHL. Yeah, you know what? Will Cooley is a guy who, you know, I think there were some people that got in my ear about Cooley because when I watch, again, there are sometimes these players that are very much leaning into their physical tools and they're very fast. Like Jake Neighbors is a good example. And there are some folks out there who I've spoken to over the years that really are not a fan of guys like that. I'd say Luke Tuck is part of that crew, but I also am just not a fan of Luke Tuck, even looking back on him in his draft year. But like, there is something to be said for physical guys that can really skate and really shoot. You know, it might not be a really sort of glamorous job in terms of like NHL results, but fans like it, and it is a job that you can do, and you need people to do it. And he does it pretty well. So, when I look at him, I look at guys like Martin Michkov, and I look at guys like, who else? To a lesser extent, Quentin Musty, because I think there's more to him than that. Ryan Leonard is another one. And I look at those types of players and go, yeah, like, I see the appeal of these guys as NHL players because they are bigger, heavier, more physical, but also can still skate and have some good traits to them as well. And so, yeah, like there's examples like that for sure that are out there. And Cooley's been good. He's been good. I don't think he's going to be a massive, huge, big-time NHL player, but fans are going to like him because he does what he does. And, I could see him playing minutes. What's your take on Adam Engstrom? Did you have him ranked last year? I did have him ranked. He was on my watch list. No means is he a stud prospect, but he's taken a step. Yeah, like he's using his tools offensively a lot more from what I've seen. Like he's a very last year when I saw him, he was deceptive in transition and getting pucks out of the defensive end pretty well for Djurgården, and kind of taking a backseat more in the offensive zone. But you saw the skill level and it was kind of there. So I was kind of thinking, okay, like he's a dependable guy on the back end. Like leave him in Sweden for a while and sure. And he's been good this year. Like he's been better. I think they drafted him really high, but like that's okay. He's fine. Like worse players I think went off the board before him. He's fine. And I did have him ranked. I'm pretty sure he's on my watch list though. Hello, Remy Chevalier. What's going on? Fantasy question. What number in this year's entry draft would you feel comfortable receiving in return for Lafreniere? I mean, it depends on what you're scoring in your fantasy league, but if I'm getting a potential top 15, top 20 pick in the entry draft, yeah, probably a top 15, top 20 pick for a Lafreniere. If it's like your general fantasy draft and you're getting a pick for Lafreniere, I have no friggin' idea. What are your thoughts on Brayden Yeager? Ringside guy on Sportsnet 650 isn't too impressed with how his game has progressed this season. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been a fan of Brayden Yeager all year. I never really saw it last year either. Like people were saying top five, just like Matt Wood. And when I went and watched those guys in the offseason before this year, I'm going, really? Like if Matt Wood is a top 5 pick and if Brayden Yeager's a lock for top 5 too, then it's not I don't think this could be a good draft. But I don't know. I see Yeager as like a fringe first round pick. He can shoot. He's a decent skater. He's got a bit of pace in his game, but I don't know. He's a project to me. Like he's going to need a lot of development to play his sort of brand in the NHL unless you want a guy who's just a power play scorer and like an okay sort of third line offensive center, right? Like that's kind of where you're at with him. Thoughts on Filius Perrenaud? That is a name that I haven't heard in a while. Filius Perrenaud is a French kid. I believe he plays for Mulhouse in France. Perrenaud. Filius Perrenaud. I think he's been hurt a lot of this season. Yeah, he's only played 4 games this year, but I watched him last year a little bit. I don't think there's much there with him. I would love it if he were playing this year because I remember watching last year going, okay, he's quicker than these guys in France. He's more skilled and he's got a pretty good shot, but he's going to need to be like really, really dominant next season to move the needle really. Like, he's an 04, so he's a little bit on the older side for this year's draft. And in last year's metrics, like he was okay. Like an under 18 in Division 1A, like you probably want those kinds of guys like up near like 2 points a game or something to be a real needle mover. And he missed the World Juniors this year. He's been injured. I don't know. I like Perrenaud. I doubt he gets drafted, but I'd have my eye on him for next season. What do you identify as Ryan Leonard's main opportunities for improvement? I mean, he is very much a give me the puck and I'll do what I want with it kind of guy, like skating a straight line. But then once in a while you see flashes of distribution ability and playmaking. And I'd love to see more of that because right now he's pretty easy to pick apart in terms of like if I'm in NHL's system and coaching against him, like he really loves to just barrel towards the inside, drop a shoulder and get inside with the puck on his stick. And if you give him any extra space in the offensive zone, he's always ready for his shot and he can really shoot it. So to me, that gives it it's an easy formula to sort of counter. And I want to see more like diversity around that and like more deception and more creativity out of his game in terms of, being a better puck distributor and making more plays in the middle of the ice rather than, he does it more than you'd think. But I want to see more diversity in his game because right now he's still kind of more of a raw shooty boy that has some good pace and speed in him and loves to hit guys and has physical ability, but just might need some time to get to there, to where he could be, I should say. How much do you value... Oh, I lost the question. How much do you value or take into account the likely development path of the player? Does the difference between a player that will likely get stuck playing 5 minutes a night in the KHL and a Michigan commit reflect in your rankings? It's a good question. But like the NHL, like it depends on the player. I mean, I think like I look at a Marat Kuznetsov, right? Like he was in the MHL when he was drafted. He hadn't played in the KHL yet. But I was pretty certain that in a couple of years, that guy, a coach will have to play him, right? Like, I find that the more I do this, and you mentioned the KHL specifically, like, when I'm watching the KHL and watching these young Russians play in the KHL for 5 minutes in a game, you can see why they're playing 5 minutes a game. Like, they're not, most pro coaches are, especially in Europe, they're not super interested in development. They play young guys because they have to. There are rules in those leagues, a lot of them, where they have to play young players. But like, I look at Daniel Boot, for example, and go, okay, clearly these are players that the KHL teams themselves value a lot. And I think that it is now a little more common for KHL teams to go, yeah, if we're not going to play this guy, we should just send him down and call up some other kid. And you're seeing that a little bit more. Like Nikita Susuyev is playing in the KHL here and there, and he's not very good, I don't think. But I look at say, for example, like Dmitry Simashev. He was playing pretty good minutes in the KHL to start the year, and then it sort of started to wane. I think Yaroslavl added some guys, and then he got hurt. And instead of just shoveling him back in the KHL, they dumped him on a line on the KHL. Then they dumped him back in the MHL to play minutes and come back from his injury. He's a guy where you watch him in the KHL and you can see why coaches aren't playing him 90 seconds a night, right? So I look at it as it just has to be managed, right? Like these kinds of things come down to like relationships and how they're managed. And most of these KHL teams, I think, hopefully, they realize that these players are worthwhile assets to have and should be getting better. You might make the argument that they're trying to stick it to North Americans maybe by sabotaging their own players because Russia things are not super great between Russia and the rest of the world these days. But I don't know. I get the feeling that the players would figure that out when that was happening and go to the NHL team through their agent and go, my team is sabotaging me, man. Like, I might need some help here. And then you go from there. I don't know. It's hard to say blanket statement wise, but I always just will draft the good players and have dialogue to like manage the situation. But I understand that there are complexities. And I mean, but look, like, I'm not sure off the top of my head of any Russian player, for example, in the last few years that one gets stuck in Russia and never comes over, that is worth coming over, or two, perpetually plays so few minutes that their development ends up destroyed. I don't think that that's happened very often. Like, like, I don't know, especially when they may deserve to play more minutes, right? Like, but there haven't been that many Russian guys that don't play good minutes in the KHL and play limited minutes where I'm going, yeah, I feel like these guys should be playing more. Yurov is one, Boot is another. But yeah, it's a good question, and but it depends on the case study that you're talking about, and it all comes down to sort of communication, I think. Stramel, Musty, Whitelaw, and Fantilli have a lot of penalty minutes. Is there a common flaw there, or is it happenstance? Well, Fantilli just got ejected from a game, and I think he got a match penalty, so there goes a lot of those. Stramel, I absolutely can see how he gets penalties, and it's similar to what I was talking about earlier with David Juracek. Same thing kind of for Quentin Musty, but I feel like he was a little more reckless at the beginning of the year. But he's a hard-nosed guy, and he works hard. You can't fault Quentin Musty for how hard he works. Will Whitelaw is an interesting one. I think that comes down to Whitelaw being a guy who is often very involved defensively in transition. Like, the data I track on him, I heard someone say that Whitelaw just was lazy and didn't care about defense, and I would disagree about that. Like, he at least tries to get involved in defensive rushes, but he doesn't do the, like, extra 10% necessary to really clog up that rushing lane. Like, he'll let guys through him. He'll stick check them once or twice, and then with his feet not moving or not moving enough, and lose track of the guy, and the guy gets in a defensive entry or an offensive exit, right? So I look at Whitelaw and go, okay, like, I can see how a player like that would get a lot of penalties. I believe Whitelaw was also involved in a pretty rough thing that may have resulted in a lot of penalty minutes in one go, but I might be mixing him up with someone else. But I mean, it definitely checks out with guys like Stramel and Musty for sure. Whitelaw, maybe I could see it in a few ways with how he plays. And Fantilli, I think a lot of that might have come from the events of this past weekend. But also, he is a pretty physical guy at times. And yeah. If you had a pick around 12 and we're looking for a defenseman and Sandin Pellikka is gone, should a team just draft for another defenseman or pick a forward in this year's draft? Well, it depends on who's left, right? Like, if Oliver Moore's there at 12, you take Oliver Moore. To me at least. If Gavin Brindley is there, I probably would take Gavin Brindley, but you might be able to get in the second. I'd be curious what a trade down looks like if you're at 12 and really want a defenseman. I'd be very curious to see what the pulse is for teams on Simishev, because around then is probably Simishev territory or Gulyayev. Like, if you really want to have some fun and you really wanted Sandin Pellikka, you may want Gulyayev because he could be a ton of fun. It all just depends on your situation, what you are looking for, and what you value, really. Did you see Frank Nazar's first goal? He looked to be pretty good. Sucks the Blackhawks drafted him. I did not see. Actually, I did see it. Yeah, and it was pretty nice. I didn't get exposed to hockey till 10 years old in the U.S. The first player I watched that made my jaw drop was Datsuk in his rookie year. Favorite player since. Who was the player that made your jaw drop first? Great question, and I know the answer immediately. It was Paul Kariya. Paul Kariya in the 90s with those Ducks. Oh my God, yes. 100% Paul Kariya. And I think I mentioned this on stream before, but there was a player who I really didn't pay much attention to as a kid because they played in the Western Conference and in a smaller market, and I just didn't really pay that much attention to them until I watched some highlights of them on the YouTube late one night when I was up. Mike Modano. What a boss that guy was. Like, Mike Modano is amazing. And if you want a guy who Adam Fantilli kind of reminds me of, Mike Modano comes to mind. Just a fast, skilled, big guy down the middle that can just do it all and plays feisty hockey, potential captain material, like, works hard, tries hard, loves the game. That's another one that's on the list. If I was a kid, Mike Modano probably would be up there, but Paul Kariya for sure is up there. Zach Benson, Cole Perfetti comparison. No, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't do that. Have you seen Colson Petrie this year? Any thoughts on him? Yeah, I've seen him. He's fine. He can shoot. He's on my watch list. I don't know. Like, he could be a decent scorer, but I don't have huge expectations for him. How would you compare Oliver Moore and Logan Cooley? Seems similar players stylistically, and they're taking the same development path. Yeah, you know what? Their data also lines up pretty well. I think Moore is a little more involved in transition and a little bit better defensively than Cooley is, I think. I think he's also got a bit better speed than Cooley. I think Cooley's quick and agile and really creative, but Moore is a little more well-refined, I think. Like, he's not as dazzling, but he makes really, really good plays a lot, whereas Cooley makes spectacular plays pretty often and kind of disappears for periods, whereas I find Oliver Moore is always a lot more engaged, faster and maybe a little bit more functional over flash. You know what I mean? But not that Logan Cooley's not functional, kind of thing. Where would you rank Shane Wright if he was a 2023 eligible? Probably 7 after Michkov, like after Moore, Benson, Michkov, Carlson, Fantilli, Bedard, something like that. Is Fantilli comparable to Veleno? I hope not. What do you think of Kevin Korchinski's season in the CHL this year? I mean, he's been very good. He's been very good. I thought at the World Juniors, you kind of saw Korchinski, like, yeah, he's a good offensive puck carrier and everything, but the defensive side of the game has always been the question with him, and that still is the case. But he's good. He's taken a step in terms of the skill level, and I think he's a little bit quicker. I think he's also, I think a big thing is that the Seattle Thunderbirds went out and got and added more, and they look absurd. So yeah. Who's the Lane Hudson in this draft? I think that literal question was asked already. Who's a guy that's good that will fall to the 60s for some reason? The 60s, you can bet on undersized skill guys, especially defensemen. Weird. Let's say Luca Cagnoni. I think he should be gone by the end of the second round, but he might be like a third round pick. Thoughts on Kai John Varia? Oh, speaking of small defensemen, I like Kai John Varia, but I don't want to draft him. I think that he could be a good college defenseman. I think he's going to BU as well. I could be wrong, but it would make sense because BU loves guys like him. I like Kai John Varia a lot, but I don't see him as an NHL prospect. He's skilled. He's pretty mobile. Not a great defensive player. He's very small. And not super threatening offensively, but he's fun to watch. I think he deserves a good college career, maybe an AHL deal at the end of it if he comes along well. But, he's a fun player, and I get the feeling that, you give him some runway. Maybe he has a good college career in Europe or something, and he's fun. He's a fun guy to watch. Can you talk a bit about Will Smith? I have a feeling the Habs will draft him. I love Will Smith. I for a little while, I was a little cold on Will Smith because I'm like, I don't know if he's going to be able to play this way in the NHL and get away with it. Because he's like I think he's the probably best case for cowboy hockey in this year's draft. And if you don't know what cowboy hockey is in my world, it's like super high dangerous offense and terrible defense. Like, it's all or nothing with Will Smith, and he is a great example of that. Like, defensively, you're not getting much out of him. He's not the physical guy. He's not fast in the defensive end. He's not pursuing guys. He's just kind of waiting for pucks and looking for pucks in the offensive zone, which for a center, not exactly what you're looking for, but that's okay. To me, I go, look, if I'm drafting Will Smith, I sit him down and I'm going, look, I don't think you're going to be a center in the NHL, but that's because we want you to do what you're really good at, which is score points. And we're gonna let you cheat a little for offense, and we're gonna put you with some guys that can finish but also have some speed and can play defense for you. And that's the role we're gonna put you in, is just go out there, razzle dazzle, score some points, make mistakes, be creative, learn from it, come back in 3 years and we'll see how you are. Maybe not 3, but like a year or 2 years, and we'll see. I get the feeling Will Smith could be a really, really, really fun offensive winger in the NHL. He's a great shooter, really creative thinker, has that like X factor, like next level vision on the ice to make plays. Just a really talented offensive guy that I think needs his role to be shifted a little bit to alleviate his defensive responsibility, because I just don't think that that's the player you're drafting him to be. Is Leo Carlsson ahead of Zach Benson by a lot, or are they close in terms of potential? I think they're pretty close, but he's ahead. I mean, Benson, I think there are questions about what you're going to get out of him at the NHL level and just how productive he's going to be. And I feel like you could say similar things about Carlsson, but feel less concerned. I think Carlson's going to, at worst, be a very, very, very good third-line guy to have on a contending team, but a good second-line center that can, chip in front of the net on the power play and maybe kill some penalties here and there. Just a good all situations center that can play the game really well. At the NHL level, I feel like he'll be there. And Benson, I feel like he'll be a really good energetic player with some offensive upside and punch, but maybe not, I don't think he's going to be as productive as he is in the juniors. He's on pace for 110 points, which is more in line with most junior players that are at the high end of the draft. Benson might be a guy that I think produces okay, but, like a Zach Hyman, right? Where he produces okay outside of this season, right? Like Zach Hyman before this season, was a good producer, but not a great one. But you know why he's on the ice, right? You know why he's on the first line, right? You get it. And I feel like Benson might be one of those guys. I've lost my crazy pills. Pockets must have holes in them. What are the reason? Oh, so okay. So this person is asking, saying I have lost my crazy pills. My pockets must have holes in them. What are the reasons? What's the reason you aren't drafting Bedard with the first overall pick? That is a great question. And one of those questions in the back of my mind that I've been kind of not consciously hoping someone asks, but like it would be funny if someone did. So Connor Bedard is awesome, right? Like I need to preface this by saying he is a phenomenal hockey player. Like the shot, the quickness, the creativity, the skill, the ability to read the ice and make something happen with almost every possession. Holy monkey, he is a heck of a hockey player. But he's a player that you're just not getting anything out of really defensively, like at all. Like he's a guy who relinquishes control on a pretty significant amount of defensive transitions because he as quick as he looks, he's not like next level quick, right? Like I track blue line to blue line times. He's on the faster end of average, like on par with a guy like Lucas Raymond, right? Not a game breaker like a Connor McDavid, but he's up there. So he's not slow, but he's not like super fast, and he's 5'8", 5'9". So those things already, and being a center, are a rough combination, I think. And I get the feeling that, yeah, like you're drafting him to play, to score points. And the problem with Bedard, I think, is, and this was a problem also at the World Juniors, he was doing so much on his own that it bled into just putting pucks on net from everywhere. Like the number of times, and again, a game I did today, the first period he did this 3 times, the rest of the game he didn't do it once. But he went end to end and shot from the boards. You know, like, yeah, he might not have had much puck support there, but it's not necessarily about the plays specifically, it's about the pattern. And this is a guy who will carry the puck and carry the puck and carry the puck and shoot it from the blue line. And carry the puck and carry the puck and carry the puck and carry the puck and shoot it from the boards or from the goal line, you know, far from the net. And you're going, okay, like in junior, when you're Connor Bedard, you can do that. You can do that because you can score. But very rarely in the NHL does that work. Could it work for him in the NHL? I'm not saying it can't, but these are, you asked the question, right? Like these are the things that when you look at him, you're like, yes, the talent is sublime and the potential is limitless. You know, I saw some stuff at the World Juniors that I haven't seen him do in the WHL before or since. So that's what's making me less concerned. But to me, I look at Connor Bedard and say, all right, if I'm not drafting him first overall and I'm drafting Adam Fantilli first, if the reason would be because Fantilli is bigger, he's, I think, just as quick. I think he is a very, very good puck transporter. He has the potential to be better, much better, I think. And that's gotten better over the course of the season. I think, you know, and I mean, he gives you more in the defensive end. He's more physical than Connor Bedard is. I mean, Connor Bedard does not shy away from physical combat, I would say. He's a chippy boy. He's a chippy boy. But Fantilli, like, you know, by virtue of his size, brings a little bit more to the table there. And he's also a great shooter in his own right and shows playmaking flashes that are really good. And he's playing against older competition than Bedard is. So, I don't know. I'm not doing it. I'm still almost certain that Connor Bedard is the number 1 player in this year's draft. And I think at the very least, you get a guy who, you know, like if I'm the Anaheim Ducks and I have a first line of like Bedard, McTavish, and Zegras or something, I don't really care. That rocks. I'm happy with that. Or I don't know what. Like it'll work. You know, Trevor Zegras centering a guy like Connor Bedard on his wing. I don't think anybody cares that Connor Bedard is not playing center because he's going to score a ton of points. And I think that that's fine. But yeah, I mean, if I've lost my crazy pills and I lose my mind and I'm not drafting him first overall, those are some of the reasons why I would do that. What do you think about these OHLers? Donovan McCoy, Lucas Moore, Jabril Toure, and Quentin Burns. I kind of dig Jabril Toure a bit, but again, he's not on my list. I might need to look at him again. I like Quentin Burns because he's, again, a guy you can bet on with skill. He's got some deception and skill in transition and speed. He kind of reminds me of like a really watered down version of like Kevin Korchinski, like that kind of vibe, like big, lanky, but skilled. I think there could be something like that with Quentin Burns, but again, like I tracked the game of him this week and it was kind of meh. But he did show some good signs and some good passes through traffic. McCoy and Moore, I'm not nearly as sold on those guys, but I'll check out Jabril Toure because I remember him catching my eye a little bit earlier in the year, and I've been meaning to look at him. I don't see the hype with Simishev. He seems like he could be a solid minute logging guy, but nothing jumps off the page when I see him other than that he's 6'4". To me, he's a Russian Justin Hall. Yeah, I mean, I kind of see where you're coming from, but like my argument with Simishev is like, if you can coach him to just get better, because he shows tendencies that are really good, right? Like the skill level might not be great, but the things he tries with his skill level are potentially really projectable. He's not the quickest guy, but for a 6'5", 18-year-old, he is very mobile and very fluid on his feet and pretty evasive. I've seen him do spinoramas this season, which for a 6'5", 18-year-old defenseman, you do not see very often, and he did it for a reason. Like he was attacking the middle, spun to the outside to put himself on the backhand and create space for himself, and I think he tried to shovel the puck back in front of the net. It was really cool, but, I mean, it didn't work, but it was really cool. Like with Simishev, it's more about like, where is he going to be in 5 years? Because I remember thinking similar things about like a Moritz Seider when he was draft eligible, where I was watching him and I'm going, yeah, I could see this guy eating minutes, but like, I don't know about like massive offensive upside here. And I think with Simishev, maybe the story is similar, but I look at Simishev and the potential in his game is really, really good. And since coming back from injury, his offensive game has kind of taken off a little bit in the junior league. He's playing 12 minutes a night in the KHL. And when I've watched him play there, he's probably the first KHL player since Rodion Amirov that doesn't look out of place there at all. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that the projection on him, I mean, he's got problems now, but I feel like the projection on him is pretty good. Thank you, Brad. I'm glad that you enjoy the content I make. It is very strange for me to think that other people watch my content, but cool that they do. Have I seen Brad Lambert in Seattle? I have not. Bonsoir, Will. The other day, Gary told me Michael Burchell is the next Johan Loshing. Is that true? I could see that. Gary might be onto something there. Michael Burchell, I like him. It's been a while since I've seen him, but he just kind of goes out there, plays a high-pace, high-speed game, kind of like Johan Loshing, and just drives decent results like Johan Loshing does. Loshing flirted with my list last year. Burchell is flirting with the tail end of my list. It all kind of checks out and makes sense. Thoughts on Matteo Mann and Dylan McKinnon? I have not been a fan of Matteo Mann at all. I've watched 2 games of him this year or so, and didn't really like any of it. I watched him at the World Junior or at the Top Prospects game and didn't think he was great. Dylan McKinnon, again, similar to Tristan Bertucci conversation earlier, he's fine. I don't think there's anything really wrong with McKinnon, but I don't really see a huge upside NHL type pick there. I don't know. He'll get drafted, but I don't know if there's like massive NHL upside with him. And someone else adds Petras Bulans. I don't know who that is, but that name is Latvian, so I'm just going to assume that they're great because Latvians are great. Oh, Petras Bulans is a guy I've looked up before. Why? Probably because I've watched him play and I don't really remember. But I'll check up on him again. I'll do it. Hello, Tyler. What are your thoughts on Paul Ludwinski and Sam Savoy? Savoy's production is much improved from last year, while Ludwinski has stagnated a bit. Yeah, I mean, Savoy, I think they're both similar. They're both north-south crash and bang guys. They play high-intensity games. Ludwinski, Savoy was putting himself in a lot of good scoring positions last year and just couldn't finish. And the same could be said for Ludwinski. And maybe that's why they drafted both of them. It can take a long time to learn how to finish, right? Against really good junior goaltending and against, pro-level competition. So, my read on both of those guys is they're probably like third or fourth liners in the NHL that have high energy, high physical games, and the offense is kind of secondary. But they do need to learn how to finish better, and it does seem like Savoy has improved from last year. While, Ludwinski doesn't really have the supporting cast he had last year, so that doesn't help him. But yeah, it's a long-term game for both of those guys, I think, and we'll see where we're at in like 3 years. Thoughts on my Fantilli Kappas, Matthew Tkachuk, but as a center? How do their games compare? I honestly, Matt Tkachuk is a guy that, I mean, maybe I could, based on what I've seen at Tkachuk, maybe I could see those two things being comparable. But now that I've seen Mike Modano video from 20 years ago, I can't get Mike Modano out of my head. So maybe that's Matt Tkachuk as a center. That might also check out. I don't think Fantilli is as rambunctious as Matt Tkachuk is, but I see where you're coming from. Thoughts on Godspeed You Black Emperor? I liked them a lot in college. Back when you're a college-age kid full of leftover high school angst. I went through a phase of listening to a lot of really complicated technical metal music when I was in high school, and jazz, those two things combined. And if you like those two things to be mashed together, I would highly recommend the band Planet X. Their albums are great. Moon Babies is awesome. Planet X, the self-titled album, or is it? No. I think Derek Sherinian is the keyboardist who started Planet X, and the first album he made solo was called Planet X, and it had the Planet X band in it, and then they stayed together and made albums after that. If you like jazz and metal mixed together, that's amazing stuff. I love it. But then when I got to university, I was still into that stuff, but I needed to slow my life down a little bit. When my first girlfriend broke up with me in grade 11, that was when I discovered Sigur Rós. And that whole genre of like ambient shoegaze music in the 2000s and early 2010s, when it was kind of like a thing, and became a thing, that, and I think that kind of thing like peaked at the We Bought a Zoo trailer. I think that had a Sigur Rós music in it with Matt Damon, and I forget who was his wife was that in that movie. Anyway, but Godspeed You Black Emperor is part of that. And I liked them and like God is an Astronaut and Explosions in the Sky, like all those bands were my college jam, and the band I was in college was super into those guys as well. Thoughts on OHL superstar Chase Stillman? Next question. Are you concerned about Brindley getting the "he played with Fantilli" tag, and how valid do you think the concerns of that crowd would be? So I do think he benefits from playing with Fantilli in terms of point production, but there's a reason I track my own data, because it goes just beyond points, and it goes and it really sort of cuts through, like if people are saying that, I'd be curious as to what it is about his game that leads to that. Like I remember him setting up Logan Cooley a couple times at the World Juniors. Does that mean that Logan Cooley gets a "he played with Brindley" tag? Probably not. So I look at Brindley as a necessary part of the machine that is him and Fantilli combined, and I'm surprised it took them this long to figure out that those two guys could work off of each other so well. I mean, it works for a reason. And for me with Brindley, I mean, it's, the data that I've tracked of him all season long has just been great. It's been great, and I can't really complain. And that it didn't really matter who he plays with. The individual data that I track for him has been very good. It has also been very good for Adam Fantilli. But then you put those Wonder Twin powers together, and you got something You got something great. Has your opinion on Luke Hughes changed since the draft? No, he was 4th on my board and top tier, and yeah, he could be a really, really good offensive NHL defenseman. Defensively, we'll see, but offensively, absolutely. If he can just tone down the craziness and risk taking, then yeah, I think Luke Hughes could be a heck of an offensive defenseman in the NHL. Any thoughts on Artur Kayumov? Now, there is a name I haven't heard in a long time. He's fine. I don't know. I've always felt that Kayumov was kind of like a mediocre skill guy in Russia, like not like mind-boggling. Like when teams draft guys like who went last year, like the guy the Buffalo Sabres drafted. There was a couple of them that they've drafted. Oh my God, what is his name? He scored a ton of points in the MHL. Oh, now it's really bothering me. And I need to see who the Buffalo Sabres drafted from Russia over the last couple of years, because those guys all... Yes, Victor Nuchev is one of them. Buffalo. Victor Nuchev is one. Alexander Kisakov, that's the one. Alexander Kisakov and Victor Nuchev kind of remind me of what I feel about a guy like Artur Kayumov, where it's like, yeah, they're good skilled dudes, but like, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. It's a very strange player to bring up. Artur Kayumov, is he just doing really well in the KHL this year? Oh my God, he's 25 years old. I am old. Okay, so he is popping off a little bit in the KHL. Sure, okay. Cool. I mean, he's fine. Who should the Canucks pick using the Islanders pick? I have no idea. That pick could be 28th overall for all we know. I have no idea. Why in the world did the Coyotes send Gunther to the Dub? He was fine in the NHL and was starting to heat up a bit. I mean, why would you leave him with the Arizona Coyotes? Like, the Coyotes are shedding dudes off their team, probably going into the trade deadline. I think also around this time of the year is when it counts as a year that removes a year from unrestricted free agency eligibility. So if he had played many more games with the Coyotes, I believe that the age at which he would become eligible for an unrestricted free agency would be down by a year. So I think the Coyotes might look at it as like, yeah, we burned an RFA year, or we burned a year of his RFA deal, but at least we maintain a year of RFA eligibility and keep him around for a while until we want to suck more. And then now that we want to suck more, we'll send him to a team that is probably a shoe-in for the WHL championship and make them even better so that he can just dominate, and then he'll come back next year and be a full-time NHLer. Personally, I don't really see the problem with it. I kind of get it. But it's, it's not the end of the world. The Coyotes, they have no priority. They have no priority, really. What do you mean they have no priority? Like, they have no priority to keep him in the NHL, I guess is what I'm saying. Thoughts on Maverick Lamoureux so far in his D+1? I have none because I don't even, I forgot he was back. But let's see how he's doing. 11 points in 17 games. I mean, that's kind of an upgrade. Yeah, that's a bit better. But, I don't know. Was never a huge fan of Lamoureux, but, I mean, he did miss a lot of hockey. Thoughts on Edstrom and Molnar? I like Edstrom. I liked Molnar a lot more at the beginning of the year, and then I think everybody caught up to him. Once in a while, you see some really interesting stuff out of Molnar, but he's kind of dropped on my list a lot. Edstrom's on my watch list. He's smart, moves the puck pretty well. He does a lot of stuff pretty well, but nothing really jumps off the page. Like, I might not draft him and just keep him on the list and circle back next year. How do you compare draft eligible and re-entry players, and how does it affect an overager negatively? I mean, it really depends. The way I see it is if I look at a re-entry player and go, I would like this player in my system based on how they play now, I would draft them. I wouldn't really want to draft a re-entry guy before like the maybe 4th or 5th round anyway, probably 4th round. But there are guys who are re-entries that I had ranked last year, like Cole Knubel, Kenta Isagai, Tyler Duke, Nikolai Khvorov, I think, who have all played well this year, right? Like, and scale well with other players that were drafted last year, right? Like, that's the other thing too, is you look at them and go, if I had drafted these players last year let's say it was like, if I had drafted these players and say it was the 5th round, am I happy with their progression this year, right? And for all of these players, I'd say the answer is yes. Even a guy like Kenta Isagai, who has 23 points in 38 USHL games, I still watch him play and I'm going, yeah, like I could see this guy after a few years in college really being something. It might take time, but I could easily see it. And you just play the waiting game and yeah, I totally see it. And it's really sort of a case by case basis as well for me to think about it. The Penguins flame out in the first round again. You're hired as the Penguins director of scouting. Who are you banging the table to pick with your first round pick this year? Well, if I'm the Penguins, I mean, if Gavin Brindley is there, I feel like Gavin Brindley would be a great Penguin. I feel like Pens fans would love him. Maybe Ryan Leonard is there. That would be a fun one. Jaden Perron in Philadelphia, in Penguin. Like, the Penguins need everything in their system, right? Like, they have Owen Pickering and guys, really, and some goalies. But, like, they have Owen Pickering and guys. It's a work in progress in Pittsburgh. But we'll see. I mean, it depends. I don't know. But Oliver Moore, if he's there, like if it's like 19 and somehow Oliver Moore's there, that would be fun. Maybe Gavin Brindley would be on that list. I don't know. Any guys from foreign hockey countries who could get picked this year? Well, I mean, foreign is, depends on what you mean by foreign. I mean, I don't think there's anybody playing in weird leagues around the world that really is worth getting excited about. There's a Danish defenseman that I kind of like, but he's not really good right now. I think Norway, I mean, Petter Vesterheim from Norway is pretty good. He's playing in Sweden. There's there's Norwegians that are on the way, though, next year that are pretty good. I like Liam Satra, who's a Norwegian forward who's eligible this year. I wouldn't draft him, but he's a guy who I've kind of liked a little bit here and there. But, but like Denmark has a couple of guys eligible next year that are kind of good. Anton Linde is one of them, and in Norway you've got Michael Brandsegg Nygaard. I think there's going to be some interesting guys coming out of those countries next year, but like down the list, I mean, next year Bruno Idzon is a really good Croatian player, who's played Croatian international hockey, and I really like him. He's a good player. But other than that, I mean, and he has a teammate with HV71 in Sweden who's also Croatian, who's also kind of good. But Bruno Idzon is the man. Isaac Phillips and Michael Krutel both entered the AHL as D+1 4th and 5th round picks. How can one look so good to the point he's now an NHLer, and the other looks so out of place that he's now in this Czech second division? I don't have the answer to that question. I don't know. They both have somewhat similar games, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, Krutel always kind of struck me as a lesser skilled version of a guy like Isaac Phillips. Like, he just kind of was a guy who was always there when I was watching him play, decently mobile, but like that's about all he brought to the page. And with Isaac Phillips, I wasn't as big a fan, but I still saw some skill out of him that could really help him. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens with Isaac Phillips when the NHL team is a little better. Thoughts on Death Grips? I love Death Grips. Death Grips is a ton of fun. I'm big into that whole world as well. Took me a while to get into like someone like MF Doom, for example. I might have been 26 or 27 when I really sort of sat down and listened to MF Doom, and then. I mean, this is really basic of me for me to say, but like, I don't think I really appreciated Doom until he died, which is, I know it's like tisk, but like, yeah. And Death Grips, I know they're from a similar world, but like Death Grips rules. I love Death Grips. Any sort of experimental hip hop, I'm down. I'm in. Like I was a huge fan of I know it's not like literally experimental hip hop so much, but like when Sicko Mode dropped and I heard it on the radio, I had been listening to a bit of experimental hip hop, and I'm like, what is happening here? Like, this is totally out of left field, and I'm loving it. What are the top 5 albums of all time? Well, I can't tell you the top 5 albums of all time, but my top 5. I mean, the Joshua Tree by U2 is on there for sure. I'm hesitant. I'm scared to show my YouTube music page. That is up there for sure, though. I really wish on YouTube Music there was a way to just view the music that you listen to the most. But there isn't. Best albums of all time. Animals by Pink Floyd probably is up there too. I'm gonna pull one from my high school experience and say Scenes from a Memory, Dream Theater. That album it's a concept album and it's incredible. Fragile by Yes. I think that's the one I'm thinking of. Oh no, Close to the Edge. Yes, that's another one. And I'll throw in something different there. Let's go. I'm a big Chet Baker fan. Maybe Chet Baker Sings. I'll put that one in there. That one's good. Or Bill Evans in Paris, I think was an album he did. He did a live album that I absolutely love. Bill Evans live. What is it called? Not Live at Montreux. It's older than that. The Paris concert. That's the one. Those are up there. Those are all good. I mean, I could go off about my favorite music forever. But if I also switch into my personal YouTube Music account, it's probably going to wipe my stream monitor, which I do not want. Oh, maybe it won't. But anyway, I don't know. I could compile a list if you really want. I'll make a Substack post of my top favorite albums of all time. Just let me know if you want that and tweet it at me incessantly. Thoughts on Griffin Erdman? He always glitters with his intensity. I love Griffin Erdman a lot. I think Griffin Erdman rocks. I think he's, again, similar to a guy like Charlie Serrato, but better, where it's like he does everything but finish really well. But he's always in the right places, always drive and play really, really well. One of the better defensive forwards out there, I think, and I feel like a team could steal him late. Oliver Peer in the U.S. I haven't seen anything of Oliver Peer, but I will take a look. I don't know this player at all. Oh, he's an 03. Well, who cares? He's 20. I'm kidding. But he's almost 20 years old, and, you know, eh. But, is he from Burlington? Good boy. Okay, good boy. You mentioned on a previous live that you aren't as thrilled with Kiviharju. What are the reasons for it? So, in all honesty, with Kiviharju, like, a big reason is just, like, he's not a very dynamic skater or, like, supremely skilled. He does a lot of what he does really well by just being a step ahead of everybody else. Like, he makes really crisp and clean passes. He makes, you know, he looks off the first option a lot more than you'd expect a 16-year-old to. But when you watch him in Liga, you know, he's small and he's not very resilient, and you can see why against men he's going to get shut out quite a bit. And, you know, he's a guy where if you have a forechecker that can pressure him quickly and put him on his heels a little, he kind of struggles. So for me, it just bumps him down a little bit. But again, like, he could go through some massive skating and skill improvements for next year and be tremendous. Because just the way he sees the ice and the way he can sort of manipulate space from time to time, it's all really good. But, I mean, people are like, oh, he's the top player next year. Like, he's first overall, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting here and I don't think that's true right now. Any recent viewings of Reinbacher? No, it's been, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, and he's fine. Every game I watch of Reinbacher in Switzerland, he's fine. He's good. He's not terrible. He's not great. He's eating minutes, doing fine. Excluding Bedard and Fantilli in the upcoming draft, how do you rank the top 5? Oh, we did that literal question off the top. Was it even you? I think it might even been you who asked it. It was. Yeah, we did that at the top of the show. Who's the most skilled player of the last 5 years who you still think there is no way in the world where I draft this player? I don't know. Because usually if there's a really, really skilled player, I'm never drafting this player, right? Like, Will Whitelaw is probably the closest thing to that, and I'm still going to draft him at some point. You still want a guy like Will Whitelaw. But you said 5 years? Maybe Carter Savoy? He's up there. Knowing what I know now, that might be Dominic Bach, maybe. Like, Dominic Bach is kind of like the Will Whitelaw of this year, you know? Or of 2018, but that's a statement that almost nobody will get. Is Frank Nazar a bad skater? I haven't been able to see him play much, but his stride reminds me of Brandon Clark. I don't think he's a bad skater at all. I mean, he's one of the faster guys blue line to blue line last year. He's fine. In that regard, he's not the most diverse in terms of like agility and quickness, but he can get moving. And he does what he needs to do pretty well to get to the net and do what he does, which is all good around the net. How close in value are picks 3 to 11? Very, very close. Very close. Oh, yeah, someone mentioned Mitchell Miller. That's probably a really good answer, too. Highly talented player that you want nothing to do with. Yeah, that's a good answer as well. What do you think about Nolan Allen and Kevin Korchinski? Are the Blackhawks' future in good hands? Really like Kevin Korchinski, even if picking him at 7 might have been a bit of a reach for me. Nolan Allen, he'll play minutes, but I don't think he's going to be great. I don't know. I've never been a huge fan of Nolan Allen, but he plays an NHL style that coaches want, so he'll play. I don't think he'll be great, but I've been wrong before. Anyway, I'm going to call it a night on that. It's been 2.5 hours. Again, just a reminder, any donations or kickbacks through Fanatics on this video. After this video is over, you can also leave a super thanks below the video as well, which is the same as a super chat. It'll pin your comment. And any revenue generated from that, I'll donate and match to send to the Canadian Red Cross for earthquake relief in Turkey and Syria. You can also scan the barcode above my head to get give me a kickback for anything you buy from Fanatics. I'll match those as well and ship those off to the Canadian Red Cross. As well, there will be no stream on Thursday. I am busy that night, so we'll come back next week for regular scheduled programming on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, again, if you really, really want a power ranking of my favorite albums through my Substack, I will do that for you at some point, maybe while I'm on vacation. And I will see you all next week. This has been a lot of fun. It was a busy night, but it's all good. Thank you very much. And we got one last question that I have to answer. Yes, Steven21, by the way, yes. Pick value falls off very quickly and then flattens towards the end of the first round. Yes, that's true. Because elite players are rare, and there's only a few of them in any draft, if any. And one more question. Did I overvalue Slovakia U20 with František Ridzon drafted to the import draft by Quebec, and he's been disappointing? Yes, you did. The Slovakian Junior League is not a very good level of play. Most of the players worth drafting are playing in the Slovakian second division for the junior team that plays there. They have an under 18 team and I think an under 17 team that play in the second division in Slovakia. So those are the ones you want to look for, because the Slovakian Junior League is it's not great. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. This was a lot of fun, and we'll see you next Thursday. All right, bye.